It's the small remote, Luke, if you want to hit the power there. Thank you.
Hi. Don't give him that much credit.
Right. It says it does not like my streaming capacity, so I'm going to double check. Okay, it looks like it is live, so. All right, we are good to go.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I will call to order this October 12th, 2023 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:06 p.m. First item of business on our agenda this evening is citizens to be heard. Ooh. Oh.
That's not Caitlin's fault. So sometimes the computers, even though if you have them muted and everything, it will auto unmatch all your muting, all your videos. So I've had that happen on city council meetings and it's never fun, but
my computer was on mute.
Yeah, it wasn't you. That happens all the time.
That's good. Sorry. That's hysterical.
So for Alexi or anybody else presenting, just make sure if you're muted, watch for that button to come unmuted to remute again. Anyway, sorry, Kaya, back to our intro.
Oh,
here.
that was hysterical. Okay, first item of business on the agenda is citizens to be heard. As usual, this is for items that are not on the agenda this evening. If you are here for an item that's on the agenda, we don't have any public hearings this evening, but as usual, we are more than willing to let folks speak or contribute if they'd like to. It looks like, based on the people in the audience, that everyone is likely here for an agenda item. We have some housing task force folks, sustainability folks, and our city economic development director. So am I correct on that, everyone? No one is here as just citizen. Okay. All right. Next item is approval of minutes from our September 14th regular meeting. If other commissioners have had a chance to look through those minutes, if anybody has any corrections, anything like that. This was a pretty long discussion that city council then did take action based on our recommendation. So definitely in these instances, really important to make sure that the minutes reflect accurately what we discussed. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the September 24th, 2023 regular meeting minutes.
May I amend that for September 14th?
I mean, yes, September 14th. So sorry. September 14th, 2023 regular
right.
meeting minutes.
We have a positive motion from Jill. Any seconds?
I will happily second that.
Okay, Mikkel has seconded. Just do a voice vote. All in favor? Aye.
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 Because I wasn't.
You can still vote on the minutes. You don't have to have been here. Motion passes 4 in favor, 1 abstaining. All right, next, our first action item. We have, just for folks here in the audience and people listening, just to go through briefly our agenda this evening, we have some briefings, a possible action, forwarding something onto city council with the housing task force plan. But we also have a workshop on the landscaping ordinance and a workshop on the dark sky ordinance. Some last little tweaks to both of those things. First, we have a presentation and possible action on the 2023 Moab Area Affordable Housing Plan update as prepared by the Moab Area Housing Task Force. This is a briefing and a possible action, and the action being that we could forward a positive recommendation to city council to adopt this affordable housing plan. I would, Corey, I'm not sure format. Do we want to invite the housing task force up first? Do you want to give some background about kind of why we're doing this and what the process is?
Yeah, I think actually it's probably encapsulated within their presentation. So we'll open full presentation format and then into a discussion area probably near the end of that presentation period.
Yeah, if you'll want to maybe pull an extra chair, and
We
just make sure you're speaking into the mic.
we have an
and
extra mic
do we?
if you'd like both. Or do you think one is gonna be sufficient?
Yeah, just put it real close to the both of you. Noel.
Yeah, I think that should.
As well. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, your full names and why you are here this evening before you start your presentation, that would be wonderful. Yeah, please
Put
pull
it
the microphone close. Yeah, closer to everybody. It's probably going to be like in your face, Laura.
Okay.
But-
Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Apologies, have a little bit of a cold, so my voice sounds a little bad, but thank you all for having us. We are members of the Housing Task Force. I'm Laura Harris. I'm the chair of the task force. I also work at the Housing Authority as the development specialist.
I'm Noelle Janou. I am the Housing Task Force Secretary, and I was the AmeriCorps Vista in the County Planning Department this previous year, working on housing policy and specifically this plan.
And I'm Caitlin Myers. I am the Vice Chair of the Moab Area Housing Task Force, and I'm also the Executive Director of the Moab Area Community Land Trust. I was involved with the drafting and approval of the 2017 plan, and so I've been mostly just advising, but helping put together this plan as well.
yeah, thanks, Avi. Welcome. We're excited to
Yes,
get to be the first ones to have this presented to us.
you're the second.
Well,
I'm sorry. You're the first in the city. I'm sorry.
just because they happen to have their meetings before us. The county. That's who
Very
I'm
thrilled to be
referring
able to share this with all of you. For a little bit of background, I guess this can kind of encapsulate maybe what Corey was going to share, but like Caitlin said, this plan gets adopted by both the city and county as a recommendation document with guidelines, statistics, and specific goals and steps of how the city and the county should be prioritizing and maintaining affordable housing. So we are going to go through this presentation and wanted to highlight a lot of the statistics and the data that we updated. I think a large portion of this entire plan update was tracking down and finding reliable and ongoing sources for this housing data, because in order for us to actually see what's been working and what hasn't, we need this credible data. So we'll be sharing data about housing stock, demographics, leading into some projections for our affordable housing needs, and then finalizing with goals and action steps that both city, county, and other partners can take with this plan. Did I see? Oh yeah, I did. Okay. Yes, I'm sorry. We did this last week and couldn't remember if it was my turn to talk or Kaylin's turn to talk. Yeah, so we, at the beginning of the plan, we have a few key takeaways of the data that we were able to get, and we wanted to just highlight this for this body, and just wanted to share, if there are any specific questions about the plan as we go through this, feel free to either stop me, or all of the information is within the actual plan, which should have been in your packets. So feel free to look at that at any point. Most of this will not change. If anything, it's just going to be small edits, details, copy, that sort of thing. So just wanted to highlight that in 2022, the Grand County area median income for a family of 4 was $70,600. The average annual wage in 2021 was just over $40,000. Nearly 60% of all jobs in Grand County are tourism related, which has stayed pretty steady since the 2017 plan. And about 15% of the Grand County population were living in poverty.
What is the definition of poverty that y'all are using? Is it below a certain household income?
This is a census defined.
Okay,
I did.
okay, cool. Just curious.
My best guess on that, typically when we're talking about poverty, it's typically households that are making below 30% of the area median income.
Okay.
Yeah, don't hold me to that. I'm not sure the census definition, but that's pretty standard when we're talking about deeply affordable or serving those that are with greatest need.
Great.
So also diving into this plan, we analyzed what the current housing stock looks like, both in the city and the county. What do we have? What is it trending towards? And what are we missing? So just to highlight, in general, the city and the county both saw significant increases of construction, which we probably all know anecdotally, but near just about 100 units were constructed every year. And that was both in the city and the county. The county is seeing higher construction growth, which makes sense as the valley is developing. A big statistic to highlight is in 2023, 67.8% of Grand County homes were primary residences and about 32% were secondary residences. That's data from the Grand County tax records in the assessor's office. So it is pretty accurate. There might be a little bit of discrepancy here and there. Overall, another fact that we like to highlight, because this is the affordable housing plan, something that we're really interested in is talking about deed restrictions or occupancy restrictions. We were able to track that data down, and there are 582 housing units with occupancy restrictions in 2022. Some of those were income restricted at the time of construction. We don't know if they are now. However, there are 73 permanently deed restricted units currently, with quite a few more coming down the pipeline. Housing efforts to date, it definitely is important to note that, and you all know this, like in your bodies, there has been a lot of work done by both the city and the county to improve, increase, and maintain affordable housing policies and ordinances. So we highlighted that in the plan as well. And just specifically based on numbers, community organizations like HASU, Community Rebuilds, and the Land Trust have developed 73 permanently deed restricted affordable housing units as of 2022. So between 2017 and 2022, and are continuing that currently. We also have a very strong network of emergency and transitional housing efforts, though we don't have any sort of emergency shelter except for Seek Haven, which is for individuals experiencing domestic violence. There are still very strong efforts through the Multicultural Center, the local homeless council, and Moab Solutions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Also, if you want to jump in on any of these.
Yeah.
So the more, I think the biggest data point in this plan, that all of the questions that people really want to know, we took an overview of all of our demographic and housing information and started to do a little bit more analysis on what that actually means, what things we're seeing, what trends we're seeing. So the biggest one, talking about housing prices, our housing costs is no surprise to anyone in this group, but housing prices have continued to increase in 2021, especially in light of pandemic. We all saw, both in Moab and nationally, saw a huge bump in housing prices. In 2022, our median sales price hit $625,000. It is coming back down again. And it's now in the 525, 550 range. Obviously, we haven't finished out this year and we don't know how fall visitation is going to affect the real estate market. But I would say that in general, I think that we're starting to see housing prices, we're starting to see a shift in our housing market. A lot of realtors are reporting that we're seeing movement above $1 million, kind of in the $1 million and up range, and not as much movement below that. Probably in part due to interest rates going so high. But I did also with this want to highlight that there is still a pretty significant difference between our home values and our median sales prices. That just goes to, partially to how hot our market is and how much more people can charge versus the reported value of their homes. In order to make that $625,000 sales price, we're seeing now that a household must make basically $150,000 in order to affordably purchase that home. When we're talking about affordable housing, just in general in this plan, I also want to define and make it clear that affordable housing means that you are spending 30% of your monthly income on your housing expenses. It's not an indicator of subsidy or of household income. It's just a percentage that you're spending on your housing costs. So that said, and kind of related to this, there's actually this is not included in the plan, but just the Salt Lake Tribune did do a piece on this recently that even in Salt Lake Valley, they're also seeing, median sales prices in the 400 range. Kind of across the state, we're looking at an income of at least 100,000 in order to be able to afford a home purchase now. And then also this is an important thing. I think that we'll still see this number kind of finalize and shift a little bit, but about 20% of our housing stock is considered short-term rentals. That looks a little different in the city versus the county, as the county has more short-term rentals, city has more hotel motel use. And then just showing this in graph form, you can kind of see just in light of the pandemic, typically our home values and our median sales prices are tracking with each other, but we have seen a pretty big spike in sales price due to the pandemic. I think that will start to even out a little bit as we move forward, but time will tell. Talking more about affordability, if we look at that dark orange bar at the top, we ran some scenarios just to humanize what this means for people of all different kind of housing situations, whether that's for service workers living in a home together, to essential workers in a family, basically our housing isn't affordable based on our wages, kind of in a lot of different scenarios, how you shake it out. And then if we look at cost burdenship, someone is cost burdened if they are spending more than 30% of their income on their housing expenses. They're extremely cost burdened or very cost burdened if they're spending at least 50% of their household income on their housing expenses. So this graph just goes to show that, but if we're talking about households that are making below that median income or below that $75,000 range, we're seeing a lot of families spending a lot more than just 30%. Once you get above that, there's a lot more options to move within our housing market. And so people are able to find more affordable options, but a lot of people in our community are extremely to at least a little cost burdened. Looking more at our housing needs projections, the 2017 housing plan had a goal of building 316 units between 2017 to 2020. So we looked back on that and said, do we meet that goal? And the answer is yes. We saw 379 new units built between 2017 and 2022. Only 105 of those were deed restricted of any kind. And I think that this is important to note because, we did set that goal, and that goal primarily, and I'll talk about our housing needs projections moving forward, but these housing needs projections are based on population growth, just based on people living and existing and being born and coming to this town. It's not a reflection of affordability. And I think it's really important to know that housing has gotten even more expensive, and we've seen an influx of second homeowners. And so I think this is just a really important reminder for us and why we're so focused on deed restrictions in this plan, to show that just because we are building doesn't mean that it is making an impact on our housing market. We do need to be very intentional in the way that we are building.
Especially if when in the city, potentially some portion of that 379 or that the percentage that aren't new deed restricted units were conversions of existing housing stock, which is our bigger problem in the city too. So that's new units of housing, but potentially a loss of housing as well. That's sort of, what do you call it? The inverse
housing correlation.
inverse housing correlation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. And I believe that this is inclusive of new residential construction and ADUs.
Cool.
And that there are more breakdowns in that plan, new construction versus specifically ADUs.
In both city and county as well.
Yeah. So looking at housing needs projections, this is the big question that everyone is always asking. How much more housing do we need to build in order to, keep up with the people that are here? How much more housing is too much or too little? And so we developed a housing needs projection model that looks at our trends with ownership versus rental splits, kind of the average growth in our different income brackets, and in general, just looking at our population growth trends. And so this model, obviously is, as we get all the way out to 2050, the further out you project data, the more unreliable it is. And so I think the most important number that we're looking at is this 2030 number. I think the message is, kind of in general, we're looking at needing to build about 1,000 units per decade, about 100 units per year, kind of keeping track with what we already have been doing, just to keep up with population growth and, making sure that we're trying to house the people that are here. So looking more into this data, we can see that there is still a higher, demand for, we're going to start seeing a higher demand for rental units, but, seeing a high demand for rental and owner occupied units. And just recognizing, even as those housing units are being built, that we will have a rate of vacancy within that. I do want to take a moment to, we talked about second homeowner versus primary homeownership earlier. There is a difference between primary and secondary residency and this vacancy rate. So vacancy rate, first of all, is found from the census versus we were looking at local assessor data. So there's going to be a little bit of a difference there. But I think the bigger difference and the reason why we're focusing in this plan more on second home ownership versus vacancy rates is because our vacancy rate actually dropped by about 9% from the 2017 plan to now. And I think that the vacancy rate per the census is more like if you're looking at an urban area and you're looking at the vacancy rate within an apartment building, and even looking within the Moab community, our housing is more full now. There are fewer options for people because more of it is occupied by people that can afford those units. So we have seen a drop in our vacancy rate. We just have fewer options for people because there are more people here, and we haven't been able to keep up with that because a portion of those new units are, second homes, overnight accommodations, that kind of thing. So we will need to take into account vacancy rates. That is going to be a constant in our real estate market. It's constant in every real estate market. But this just goes to show that even by 2030, we will need 260 new rental units. So apartments, ADUs, other kind of rental options, but we will also need to see 525 ownership units. I think it'll be interesting to see how this changes over time. This is just based on our trends over the last 5 to 10 years, what our owner and renter demand rates have been.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was going to wait to the end, but you brought up this perfect question for me and so teed it up. So with that housing needs projection, which was the previous slide, as far as your percentage rates for primary and secondary, so your estimated goals are based on a static percentage, meaning that's the current status quo. And we're assuming we want to continue that status quo of, I think it was a 70 to 26% primary to secondary percentage. status that you were saying, right?
So the needs projections did not incorporate the secondary versus primary residency, like in the whole calculation. So as we're projecting out, I think one of our goals, and we'll get to that slide, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the goals is to just generally decrease the secondary residency goal, but not by a specific number, because we don't have like data over time for the secondary residency rate at this point. So we can't really project.
Perfect.
So
Okay.
generally saying we just like to decrease it. Once we have more data, we could actually come up with a model that could show what the community needs.
Perfect. And that, so I've worked with the housing task force on the development of this. That was just one question I never did finally ever get to with our workshop. So you teed it up perfectly. No, thank you. That was with our economic study, was one of those big questions of what is the status quo. So based off our projections, we can make some of these projections, but that's also implying we are currently okay with that continuing trend. But that's, I think you've answered that question. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say, so this housing model is based on demographic trends and how that plays into, so this is looking more at, the changes in our household sizes and how much our population has grown and changed, and how much the split between rentalship and ownership has changed. This is not looking at housing stock designation or use. This is just looking at, kind of taking more of a people focused, like how can we expect people to change in our community, and then how do we anticipate how many units we need to serve those people. So I think that'd be a great new thing to analyze.
Yeah.
And I think even if we're looking at 949 units in the next 7 years, just to serve the increase in people, then, we can assume, we can either assume that, 300 of those might go to second home ownership.
Right.
Which
Right.
is gonna mean that we're not actually meeting this goal. We're if that's
That's the
goal,
nugget piece, right? That's exactly so when we get to later, I don't mean to jump ahead, but when we're doing stock and stability, that's such a, I think, really important component is when we're making these projections, understanding not all these are going to be going to the optimal, what we'll maybe call a community optimal use, but baking that in, understanding, okay, maybe we need to inflate that projection to accommodate for some of these that are not going to be going to serving directly the community that way. But yeah, thank you. All the work that you guys were doing in the data, it was really, that was just the one piece I never did get to circle back. So thanks for letting me interrupt for a moment.
Yeah, I think now that we are starting to track assessor data, that'd be something to start doing a real track on, comparing. Because even when we got the 379 new homes number, it was like, okay, but we've all seen all of the like $1 million townhomes that are going up. So those are in that number too.
Yeah.
We don't have like a clear breakdown. So I think that's something to start tracking. Okay, last slide on housing needs projections. I just wanted to highlight looking at income brackets. So earlier we looked at, households that are making less than 75,000, which is, kind of ballpark of our current area median income. A lot of those households are on a cost burden spectrum. And so we looked at specifically when we're looking at essential housing, local housing, this graph really shows that we need to be building with a focus on that, particularly with basically half of the units that we build need to be in that 25,000 to 75,000 range. Really, it just confirms what we always talk about, needing to serve our essential workforce. We do see some numbers in that 100,000 and up range. That's kind of that light blue line at the bottom. We see a need for families that are making less than 25,000. That's a dark red line at the top. But most of the housing that we really need is in that middle of that graph. And, a lot of that adds up. So just kind of data confirming that we do need housing that is specific for that income range. So With that, I'll pass it off to Garcia.
Pass it off. Yes, so hopefully that was able to give you all enough background and about the updates and, you know, based on our models, what we see as the true community need. So thanks for chiming in and hopefully answered your questions. Again, feel free to shout anything out. But so we had all this data, we have all these narratives and what's going on. And it's important that we are like us as the task force and all the entities and partners who have been involved are able to actually provide goals and steps of how we're going to be able to maintain and increase the affordable housing needs that we see. So at the end of the plan, we have the goals and action steps section. And so what we did is we were able to highlight and prioritize 4 or 5 different large goals or subjects, I guess, topics. I think of it as an umbrella. So if you look at this first slide, we have supply. So one of the big goals and priorities of this plan, as we were just talking about, is increasing supply in a way that's actually beneficial for the community. So we have 3 main goals in terms of supply within this plan. The first one is to meet those housing needs projections that we just shared. The second goal is to increase the diversity of the housing stock, which we didn't go into a ton with this presentation, but as we're seeing around town and seeing what is being produced right now and in the past, having different options of housing stock, whether that's ADUs, whether that's apartments, whether that's more townhomes or single family, increasing the diversity of housing stock is giving people of all different means more opportunity for housing. So that's another goal that we have. And then the third goal is to increase ADU and infill development. Specifically in the city, I think that's an important one to highlight. There are pockets here, as I know you all know, that we can definitely be prioritizing more and increasing accessibility of ADUs and construction. So those are our top 3 goals. And then within that, and also just to backtrack a little bit, sorry, I'm a little all over the place, but we had
It's complicated.
it's not like we're just trying
Super
to
easy problem to solve. Come on.
right. We had a few workshops with other housing task force members over the last few months. It's been where we got together and we really fleshed out what are specific steps that we can take that all go towards these goals. So these steps in all the next slides were really collaborative through city council members and city and county staff and ourselves and other really crucial members of the community. And so these were our top steps and priorities that we are recommending to the bodies to continue. And we kept them fairly vague. We don't want, it's a balance of, do we put too much pressure where it feels almost impossible to achieve or work towards, or is it too broad that there's not any backbone behind it or like push to get it done. So we're definitely would love to hear from you all if you think it needs more oomph or it doesn't. So yeah, we're gonna share those.
I would also just note that I think another reason why they're more broad is because we want to have similar goals between the city and county. I think that makes it easier for everyone to be able to collaborate on initiatives both within our government systems and also within the housing task force. And so I think that as we're talking through this with both city and county, those might change a little bit, but that's more context for that as well.
And it was exciting when we were going through this as well, because some of these steps that we've thought about or that were actually even included in the 2017 plan, we're seeing are in progress currently. So, like looking at zoning ordinances, both city and county, we're working on that. We're doing that. So continuing that is a step in priority. With that, we have evaluating opportunities to develop housing or mixed-use development on publicly owned parcels with a public-private partnership. We definitely want to focus on different incentives like density increases, zoning tools, density bonuses, types of things like height restrictions, parking, which we know has been in the works and done, but continue those even to a higher level, strengthening those, as well as encouraging supply of housing alternatives for people who are vehicle dwellers who need transitional housing of all forms that match both seasonal workforce or folks who are, just needing transitional housing in general. And we're seeing that with the county ADO ordinance right now. So again, great stuff. These are things that we want to continue doing and also aim for that we may not be using to our full advantage. Our second umbrella that we have as our goals is stability. I think this goes hand in hand with how do we make sure that our locals and our residents and the people that who call this place home, how do we keep them here? And how do we keep our housing stock for those folks? So the overarching goal is to preserve local housing options in perpetuity, so those aren't being lost. With that, as we have been highlighting today, we do want to create the goal to increase the percentage of primary residence homes from 67%, what we're seeing today, to 80% by 2030. This is one of those numbers where we want to say 80. It feels a little bit rigorous, but based on some overnight rental ratios from the county, like we will be seeing more overnight accommodations stop being built. And so that ratio will hopefully go more towards primary residency. However, and would love to hear anyone's thoughts. We could certainly say we could increase primary residency from 67%. Let me say that again. We could use a percentage increase. So we could say increase primary residency by 10%. So that's just one of those goals that we're still fleshing out a little bit. And because we don't have a ton of data, because this is new, it's just one of those things that we want to be attainable, at least working towards. So,
And we'd love feedback.
and we'd love feedback if you can't tell.
So may I ask a question about that goal? So I assume this is looking at things that are zoned residential. This does not count commercial. So this is not hotels. This is not overnight accommodations and Airbnbs that are in a non-residential zone. Okay. It's helpful for the context.
I think it does include.
If they were like grandfathered in, probably.
I
But
think
There's a-
through the assessor, like through the tax, I like went through a lot of
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
breakdown. There is a way that they can be taxed as secondary residences if they're Airbnb as a commercial
Mhm.
entity, but we still included them in this because they are homes.
okay,
Yep.
Great.
So quick plug there.
Yes.
Maybe what we might, the city, call a difference between an overnight accommodation and an STR, short-term rental. So the construction type is a major factor of that versus IBC or
Yeah.
IRC, meaning that could be converted back to a home.
Yep.
Versus, like you say, a hotel. That's a different animal. altogether.
totally. So this probably includes like the Entrada and probably includes like the Williams Way condos, things like that versus like
Mhm.
the, I know they're not in the city, but like the little tiny homes on Mill Creek,
Right.
Like a
Spanish Valley Drive. Yeah.
STR camp
Yeah.
park or
Yep.
something like that.
Yeah, I think the second goal, as we're presenting it both to city and county, and I think this is a great opportunity to collaborate among each other of like, what is this goal and how are we going to achieve that? So definitely wanted to highlight that. Our third goal within stability is to increase the number of both income and occupancy restricted homes from 582 to 1,500 by 2030. The reasoning behind this 1,500 number is largely, it's pretty backed based on the number of units coming online with Arroyo Crossing, with HDHO construction that hasn't happened yet, and with AEH deed restrictions coming online within the next few years. So 1,500 is, I don't want to say a safe goal by any means, but we likely will hit that. So we certainly could try and make that more aggressive as well, in terms of how can we promote and prioritize further income or occupancy restricted units as well. And then the last goal we have is to decrease the number of cost burden households. So folks spending over 30% of their monthly income on housing from 36%, and specifically prioritizing an effort to decrease those renters and households owning a unit with annual incomes of less than $50,000. So that low income range of folks. Any thoughts or questions on those goals?
What are the methods for the final goal? Like what would you, it would be rent stabilization, obviously supply goes into that. If you have more dedicated rentals coming online that are more appropriate, so people don't have to rent out the big house for $3,000 a month, like something like that.
Yeah, totally. Also, like with cost burden households specifically, just continuing those income restricted opportunities through, HASU, through community rebuilds, other partnerships like that. All right, and we definitely touched on this a little bit, but sorry. No.
I jumped the
it's not-
gun.
It's not just you. Many of our steps within the stability section is focused around deed restrictions. We see them as such an important tool for how we would be able to move forward with this area of stability, especially with primary residency and or income. So firstly, the first action step we have is slightly related to this, but to develop a community-wide cooperative deed restriction administration program for the current deed restrictions we have and the future ones. I know it's very important for the city and a priority right now to work towards that. And on the county's end with the HCHO and MACO programs, we're on our way with that. So let's all work together to be able to house all these deed restrictions in one place and be able to track the compliance and monitoring of it to make sure that they're being used effectively and not slipping through the cracks. We all
Clear too.
what?
Oh, I was just saying that makes it clearer for homeowners and buyers and sellers and lenders and realtors
Absolutely.
as well, which is the constant
Yeah.
sort of
Pushback.
stress that we hear
Yeah.
when you talk about deed restrictions. So,
Absolutely.
That makes it easier for people to apply.
yeah.
Any number of dealerships.
This is, if I might chime in, one of the higher priorities, I think, from at least the planning staff perspective. We're really excited to see this action step. And so when it does move on to city council, I think it's going to be highlighted because we've talked about how do we actually develop that administration and what that city's role either in how it is we're going to contribute to develop that framework.
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, we're just an additional plug. We're really excited to start that.
Awesome.
Yes. We also aim to have the deed restrictions be as long as possible, at least 50 years and preferably 99 or greater. So it's really just in perpetuity with the unit. We also, you may have heard talk or ideas floating around about a deed restriction, like a voluntary deed restriction program, where folks would be able to put a deed restriction on their home or their unit for future residences, whether that's like primary residency or whatnot. So we want to investigate how that would work in the Moab area. We see this in Colorado. The Park City did a pilot program this year. However, you know, we have a unique market, we have a unique situation. So how can we formulate something that's right for us? Another aspect of stability that we want to highlight is the ability for people to find long-term rentals. Like for myself, like I'm going to be kind of a long-term renter as far as I can see in this town. So how can we preserve those long-term rental units that we have here? And through that, how do we create a good landlord program to be able to incentivize and like want people to be that good landlord, be that person who keeps their house on the rental market. So there are many other communities that have models of this. And I think this is a great program that like the Housing Task Force could look into and partner with other entities around town. And then the last goal or step that we have is exploring ways to require new developments to provide housing mitigation plans when they propose the demolition of existing housing units, as we all saw last year with those 2 trailer parks, and folks were just being given not very much warning or backing as they were having to leave their affordable housing option. So those are our action steps for stability.
These are huge. It's such a huge category here.
It is, yes. Now we're going to talk about money, fiscal support. That's huge. We want money to encourage and build housing, affordable housing, but where did it come from? So that's the goal, is to identify funding streams, both city and county, to encourage that development. With that, our action steps are by 2026. So in 3 years, I guess 2.5 years, Moab City and Grand County will allocate an ongoing amount of money into their affordable housing funds. We also want to explore financial policies and programs that source funding for affordable housing from the entities that perpetuate or contribute to the affordable housing crisis. And also a plug for the next housing plan, to have the public agencies formally budget resources to execute the next housing plan, so staff doesn't take their time doing it currently.
And just provide more resources in general.
Yeah.
There are a lot of fantastic firms out there that really specialize in this sort of plan formulation, and have a lot of expertise in working with other communities that have faced similar issues. And so there's a lot to be said for having existing funding out there in order to tap into resources for the staff so that it's not on them.
Even though both of you learned, all of us as Vistas who worked on this housing plan learned so much.
Thank you, AmeriCorps Vista program, for Live to Serve, almost entirely bolstering our like smart professionals under 30 category. I love it.
Love to hear.
Look at all these faces.
Any thoughts, feedback on the subsidy?
Corey, what do we have right now as far as what the city would have sort of immediately available for dedicated affordable housing funds? We have the fee and lose from the Wahoo,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
That's the
You nailed it.
primary one. There we
Yep.
go. Which is sort of dried up by now, probably, with no new OAs. Yeah.
We obviously with the ordinance amendment, we are no longer taking on new overnight accommodations that would access that Wahoo.
Yep.
So we're not refilling that fund, but also with that, and then with the city's Walnut Lane project, kind of at a temporary freeze, we haven't been spending it either. So we're kind of at a budgetary freeze at the moment, but we do, through our BAE economic study that we did through AEH, we do have some data that could create some new tools for income. And then there's also some additional nexus material that we could pull out if we want to re-engage OAs in a different way. So there are some things in the back burner which we can have access to. It would take some development, but right now that's the tool.
Yeah.
And so the faucet is currently tight shut.
Right. So even just starting those conversations of Yeah. Are we going to open the faucet
Yeah.
or have more water pouring in? You know, that kind of stuff. Anyways, okay. So yeah, that's essentially what we're referring to.
Cool.
Just another small umbrella point is data. As we were going through this plan, just realizing how essential this data is in order to make informed next steps and decisions. So the goal is to regularly update and maintain Moab area affordable and just housing data in general. So with that, the county is planning on, they just got a new Vista and they're planning on having her term mostly be focused on creating like a housing dashboard indicator. So as much housing data and the current status quo of housing will be in one like online place. And then also to update the housing plan every 5 years to reflect the current data that we're seeing. But yeah, lastly, we touch on sustainability. We do know that we have a great sustainability plan in the works. However, we did just want to support goals that definitely manage and promote both the well-being of folks who do live in affordable housing and ways that we support future growth and construction and building of projects and units. So that's advancing water conservation policies and following what's being done in the sustainability plan mostly, but also how can we support different energy efficiency tools, climate change mitigation, types of things like retrofitting your home, not even with solar, but even just with all electric or weatherization, which actually I kind of got into all of the action steps, but both in new construction, how can we leverage zoning overlays and development agreements so that developers and builders have to have certain levels of sustainability with their development, prioritize water conservation, and then also promoting utility services, cost reduction programs such as the HEAT program. Right now, there's great rebates and whatnot with Utah Clean Energy programs and just general energy reduction. I think that is all that we have in this long presentation, but yeah, really excited to share this with you all and potentially bring this to the council in 2 weeks, but also welcome for any feedback or further changes or considerations right now from all of you.
Yeah. The data and having this all in one place is that alone would be extremely valuable. So thank you. Yes.
Great job.
Raquel said,
That's a lot of
yes.
work. and
I
a lot
mean,
of
yeah,
time.
I know
Wow.
so many different entities,
Amazing.
nonprofits who just constantly use that plan
Yeah.
for stats to apply for grants
Yep.
and, you know,
Yep.
talking to people just in so many other communities. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, like the whole goal of creating the dashboard is so that this can be updated every year instead of every 5 years, so we can have the most accurate data and really make much more informed decisions about it. So the data part, as we got further and further into it, we're like, this is a huge deal. Really, yeah, but a lot of work into this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. Great. Aside from the one thing that you flagged, are there super specific things that, you know, this would be potentially recommending this to city council, but we do try to sort of get most of the, sometimes they listen to us, sometimes they don't, but we try to get a lot of the discussion sort of done here versus later on.
Right.
Are there things that you'd really like us to sort of hash out and figure out as far as like any amendments to what you're presenting before we recommend it to city council? I know there was that one, should you say 80% or 10% more?
Right.
I see the value in both.
Yeah.
I kind of defer to Michael or Corey.
Mhm.
Yeah, in that particular instance, and this is again going back to some of the lessons learned through the AH process, is if we set a particular, say that aspirational jump, we aren't in direct action with the development of this community. So there are just an unbelievable number of variables and market trends that can impact how that's being done. So that big aspirational percentage jump, well, it development as a whole might be taking a huge lapse, but it could be perceived that we weren't accomplishing our goal by that perceived jump.
Yep.
So that is to say, when that adjustment was made within that goal set or the objectives to that, of making it a percentage aspect of that of development, it correlates with a lot of the data that we have.
Yeah.
It gives us some tangibility to whatever is going on in the community. So say we do have a couple of years of where interest rates drop, development prices decrease, we have a huge jump. Maybe we could have reached a little bit further. So what that percentage of development gives us, that ratio, which kind of goes back to what some of the examples were of how that development trends being tracked, of, not everything being developed is actually going towards our community, but to the other instance of a lot of the stuff is. So we're actually can be successful depending on which side of the coin that flips. So that's my plug, is I want to, I would prefer to see it more focused towards that percentage association versus a bigger
Yeah.
percentage jump. Does that make sense?
Are you
Okay.
saying percent of newly developed units?
Would be how we've developed AEH. That isn't exactly how it's phrased here. We're just saying a 10% increase.
Okay.
I would go a step further to say the accuracy would be a ratio of newly developed units. A percentage of those can be either that constant, if we want to call it just easy, in 80-20, what we'll call primary or local housing, 20% not,
Sure.
is that we're increasing at the proportional rate. Or you can see even aspirationally, well, we want to be that correct percentage, but even maybe higher, meaning we are moving the meter of what would be larger percentage. So there's actually three options.
Yeah.
What's being proposed would be the second option, which I'm far more comfortable with, a percentage jump of the 67. What I would go a step further, but that's extra work we didn't have time to get into, would be a ratio percentage jump.
Yeah.
It would be a minor language amendment that I think we could figure out, but at this point in the game, I think the data and what's being produced and the recommendation, I'm totally comfortable with a 10% increase.
Totally. Yeah. Luke, you seem to have something to say. Would you mind coming to a mic?
Come here, Luke, come and sit down.
Get to be Corey. Do you feel powerful?
Yeah. Ooh, I control the Zoom. So I was thinking, to me, I think potentially the percent increase or the percent change can better account for like that inverse housing thing that you were talking about. Like, let's say like worst case scenario for our community, like Grando gets bought out and like we build like a bunch of like new homes, but there's like 50 new homes in there. We're losing a ton of housing stock. But percentage wise, like if 80% of them are built for like primary residents, then like it seems like we're meeting kind of like those projections, but we're actually going in the opposite direction. So that to me was just like one of those things, like it kind of gives that different perspective.
So which option would that be?
It was the change by percent, not a goal percentage.
Okay. So that would be
By 10.
Like 10%.
Yes.
12%.
Yes.
or-
Okay. To increase from 67 by 10% of
Mhm.
67 of like the current 10% of what I think would then be the question.
I think it would be based on like the current overall number. So
Yeah.
based on current number of primary residences, we want to see that increase by 10%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or maybe 12.
So
then
it
that would
wouldn't end
assume
up
that all-
necessarily being 80% of the total. It would be
I was closer to that
10%
80.
of what there is now,
Currently.
Yeah.
with whatever that number
Right.
is.
Honestly, I
Like,
think we might. need
That's
like
actually a
both.
number.
Because we do have that hard number of current,
Yeah.
and we just haven't included the hard number. I don't know.
So it
some
wouldn't even, we
thousand
wouldn't even need a
something.
percentage. It could actually just be a number if we have it based on numbers right
Actu-
now.
I think there's actually value to both because it allows us to monitor both those things where it allows you to monitor market trends, but it also kind of allows us to monitor our actual
Mhm.
like actual number of like primary residence supply in the
Yeah.
market.
That's super valuable, that stat. Yeah.
Or addressing it from like a new construction perspective and having a goal that says like, we want X amount of new construction to be like primary homeowners, and then another number that is, we want all of the housing in town to like reach this 80% goal or something like that.
Mhm.
Because I could see a trend occurring
yeah.
where essentially a lot of the new construction ends up being bought up as second homes. I mean, the place down the street for me, those condos are going for $1 million. That's hard for anyone who's working and living here in town to achieve. And I see a lot of new construction going that way, and then like remodels becoming ways that people can like have more affordable housing. So understanding the new construction versus the total housing and what
Mhm.
direction those are both going, I think would have
Yeah.
some merit.
And I
Maybe
think that,
breaking it out actually
Yeah.
into two different numbers.
and I think by like directly tracking the number of primary residences as well, or that increase, it also allows for situations like if like a short-term rental business license lapses, and like that property can then revert back to a primary residence, like we're accounting for those types of situations. Because I was kind of thinking, going back to like the deed restriction stuff, like I was looking at your numbers and the projections for needed like new residential units for 2030 was 949, but there was also a goal of having 918 deed restricted units by 2030. So we're basically talking like 95+% of, unless we can incentivize, but unless we can incentivize existing properties to do the voluntary deed restrictions and stuff like that. And so
I think that that's gonna be critical to meeting that 1,500 goal. I think there's no way we
oh yeah,
can anticipate building 900 new deed restricted units.
oh absolutely not. And I think if we tried to force something like that, the state would step in real quick
Yes.
at those like percentage levels. I was actually, I thought for you all to maybe ponder and look into. I've been very fixated on transferable development rights.
Oh, you were telling me about this
Yes.
last week.
And I wonder if like, we don't have the funds to do a Veil and Deed program. But we do have the option of basically creating this like new tool within the market. So what we can do is create a program where if somebody voluntarily, and I think this would probably require some really significant city-county collaboration since they really have much more developable land. But if somebody voluntarily deed restricts their home, then they can get issued basically like a transferable development right certificate. And the county can have like designated receiving zones where there are bonuses, like those density bonuses. And basically there's a base density for that area. And then the developers can purchase up to a certain amount of these certificates to increase their density in that area. So it becomes a market driven thing where it can increase like the likelihood of a project to pencil or the profitability of a project. And the city's not footing the bill for it. So I'm sure these are like super complex things that I
Yes.
would take a lot, but just,
Not your meeting. No,
I
I'm just
know.
kidding.
but just like something to think into. Well, I wasn't sure when to give my feedback. by
No,
the way.
No. This
Do I
is
do it
this is
now
good.
or
I'm
next
just
week?
This is
Yeah.
the
I'm just giving you crap.
Can I ask a quick, so is that like a similar example like water rights, like there's a certain amount of water rights and you can buy from other people?
It's almost like carbon credits would be more akin to what it would be based on, and it's a bad analogy, but it's a closer analogy where it's like, you could then have this and you could either use it yourself for another property that you own. Say you are a multi-property owning individual or company in town, which there's several, or you could sell it to somebody else for something
Yeah.
else.
I keep forgetting the name of the community, but there's a community in Utah that they more so did it for like conservation easements and like restrictions. They wanted to protect like the shelf of a mountain, like right next to their community, or the shoulder, sorry. And they basically had two options. You can either deed restrict the property over to the city and you got like 4 certificates, or if you put a conservation easement on it, you got 1. And they ended up having like, was it like 400 acres deed restricted over to their community. They've built that into like a whole like bike trail system for them, but it also helped fuel a lot of higher density development within their community. And I think in that community, one of those certificates, once like the market stabilized, were selling for like $40,000 a piece. And from what I understand, I think Vail's program was like a $50,000.
Yeah, sometimes it's based on. Like,
Oh, the value
percentage
of the property.
the value of the
Yeah.
home.
And I had a question for you all, kind of recognizing the significant variety of need in housing. One of the things that I was thinking of right now is that since there isn't housing for like the middle income, like the 75,000 or up, like household, middle to higher income earners, they are now competing with everybody else for all supply, including the lower cost supply. And so like that is driving up the overall like rental prices. And so I was thinking, like, would it be important? Let me backtrack a little bit. I've recognized that a lot of your projections are based off of population growth, but like that doesn't necessarily take into account the current deficit that we have, correct? Because that was the issue that we experienced with BAE, is like we didn't really know how do we measure what the current deficit is. Are you all familiar with any ways to kind of track that?
I'm gonna say unfortunately, no. I think that you know, we can pretty easily from the census get, you know, our size of household, average household size. We can figure out all kinds of ways. I think that there's a very real, very invisible part of our population that is invisible. You know, they're invisible to data, they're houseless in some form or another, and that is that need. And I think that between, you know, our data and our analysis, and also, you know, looking at like PIT counts and looking at you know, local homeless council data, like
Seasonal workforce trends.
Yeah.
yeah,
Because
I just don't know how to evaluate that.
yeah, and yeah.
Absolutely, there are people here. That's
Yeah.
right. Population isn't here.
Mhm.
Right. So there's definitely would be a acknowledge that.
Yeah.
How you track that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you basically need to have probably like a year-long, very intensive, like random sampling of the community to try to be able to project out the needs. Because I was thinking by actually being able to identify like where people are living, what they're versus like what they're looking for. Because I think people who live here for a longer period of time eventually have a greater likelihood of being able to get into kind of some of those higher earning positions. And they also have the ability to develop a lot of those local relationships about kind of those like little gems, like rental gems that are at a lower price. So we're potentially having higher income people being directed towards like lower cost units.
Right.
And so being able to kind of identify the strata between like all of that, I think would really inform where we should be putting our efforts into developing like what types of housing, primarily ones that are restricted for like local occupancy and residency. Because it's one of those things, if we see that there really is a lot of higher income people living in like below market units, it might make sense to prioritize building some higher income units that are only like AEH, like restricted or something, to ease some of that competition at the lower level. Like we're basically like trying to separate
Class.
one giant market into the actual kind of typical housing markets that we see in a healthy like housing system.
Well, it's like honestly a lot of the new, there's like some super high, what I would call, I don't know, I feel like I don't have a good perspective of what's a lot of money and what isn't, because I don't have a lot. Those $1 million condos coming in, very likely a good percentage will be non-primary residences because they don't have deed restriction that was prior to the AEH. But there's also that market where if you're looking at a town, you're saying, oh, I would like to have a second home in Moab. You can either buy $1 million condo, or you could buy a single family house on Walker Street for $550,000. Which one of those are you going to choose? But if there's something in the middle for like 6, 7, that's new with higher stock, maybe that's the one you go with instead of the place on Walker you might have to put more into and takes more upkeep and fix more up. So weirdly, it could potentially take some pressure off. I think that what the Abbey subdivision will be a really interesting example, because I think there's going to be a mix of housing types in there, none of which is deed restricted. Otherwise, other than just not being overnight rentals, I think it'd be really interesting to see which units and which price points get bought by who, as far as the market, and see if that has any effect on some of the, honestly, like the older, like 1950s bungalows in town that tons of them in the last 3 years got swooped up as second homes. So
Yeah, no, totally. It'll be really interesting to
Yeah.
see these projections and
And I think if we, like, this is something, your question is something we grappled with a lot, because we recognize that the projections are just like business as usual, and current status quo. And
Yep.
we recognize that it is not okay where it is. And so it feels hard projecting that, because we're like, oh, but we know it's just going to perpetuate worse.
yeah,
So recognize that, and it's just
Mhm.
something that's really hard to measure. And just to kind of circle back to that, like, data point of, I'm just like scribbling here, but who's not getting counted in these projections. I kind of broke it down into 3 categories. We had who is not living in homes and not getting counted by the census, who isn't here, as you said, but also who, to kind of sum up what you said, who is not in the right category of, like, they make this income, but they are living in housing that is outside of their means on either end.
right.
And so how we measure that, I don't really know, but if we could, this all comes back to data, but if we could figure out what those 3 data points are over time, I think that would inform a lot of these
Yeah.
really big policy decisions. And I think that third one of who is not in the right category right now has a lot of sway, and it's really hard.
totally. Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, but thank you
thank
very
you.
much for the work. And yeah, I mean, like, I think you guys did an amazing job with like what data you had, and the projections. I think we can just recognize like that is the floor. That is the bare minimum. And sometimes like that's important to like recognize like what the floor is. But, yeah.
Floor.
Hopefully we become well acquainted with the floor and maybe the ceiling.
I mean, quickly, that was, I think, a really good observation within this, and to kind of refocus back into what this is, which is a plan as a policy guiding tool. I think all those things are baked in so that when we're utilizing this tool, we understand those elements that are either in the study or not in the study to help us advance some of those policies. So again, what I'm hearing is that we need many arrows in the quiver, which is again where we're aiming.
Yeah.
But this is going to directly support that. So this is a policy strong plan, even given the lack of data that we have, because we can acknowledge it through this data.
Yes.
So if that makes sense. The lack of data is just as powerful as some
Yeah.
of the data that we do have, but
There still is a lot of really helpful and informative data. It just is easy to be like, oh, it could be so much better to have
totally,
more,
this is,
you know,
yeah,
so
I think this is
if you take a look through the
successful
plan,
tool.
there's certainly a lot more. But I will just say, like, just that conversation I thought was super helpful, and I think helps us. I think that'll help us navigate that goal question that we
Mhm.
have, and we can firm it up. And I almost think having 2 goals stemming from that might be beneficial.
Yeah, the multi-prong, it's surrounding the same aspect, but it seals in those sides so you're not leaking on one particular area. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you all.
I just want to say thanks, and to point out to community members watching, yes, this is job related for Laura, Caitlin, and Noel, but this is primarily a volunteer enterprise, the Housing Task Force, and running it. And you all are a huge asset to the community, and it's so appreciated. And I want everybody to see that. So thank you. This is just phenomenal data and information and presentation to have that you know, a decade ago, we didn't have. So it's super important. Thank you.
Thanks to Corey, Michael, and also Carolyn.
Yeah.
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 being part of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Any questions for any of the housing task force folks here right now?
Oh, it was just very affordable. I mean, very,
Yeah.
very well done. I'm impressed.
Credit for the layout and the graphs and everything. We had a friend do that, so
Thank you.
it looks way prettier than what we could have come up with.
I am kind of curious to hear people's thoughts on one of your original questions about the scope of the action steps and the goals and kind of walking that balance between having them be broad enough that they can be adapted to what the city and the county individually decide upon and not kind of stress people out with too much rigor or specificity, but at the same time having enough specificity for some accountability and kind of to enable different agencies to take more direct ownership over different steps. I don't know if others had thoughts about that question that you three posed earlier.
We have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, collaboration is huge, but I personally, having sort of been part of or watching this process for a while, I think there's a lot of value into each entity and each municipality having its own goals because it allows you to not sort of kick the can to somebody else.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, oh, we have X amount of units. Okay, where are the X amount of units that are in the pipeline? They're primarily in the county. And so I think like having the city recognize that like we can't and shouldn't just for community and socioeconomic reasons, we can't put all of our development outside of city limits, our future development. I think taking that responsibility on and recognizing that is actually huge. And I want to make sure that we're collaborating, but also parsing it out enough between, geographic boundaries that everyone understands their own personal responsibility to help solve this problem, for like lack of a better way to put that. Because I mean, I'm very clear that I don't think that this is the county's problem to solve for the city or vice versa. I think it's a collaborative thing, and I think there's give and take for everybody. And we can't just be like, oh, we have huge parcels of land out in the county, and therefore that's where all of the new affordable housing should go. I think that's wrong. Like morally, I think that's wrong. I don't think that's fair. I think that provides a whole host of other issues in a place where we don't have public transportation. So yeah, I think making sure that we have goals within the city, little attainable ones, our own, maybe that's something that, if council likes the plan, and then that's a little future step that maybe we can do as a planning commission or city staff to sort of have our own little niche within that.
And Michael and I did spend some time with Caitlin and Laura specifically on those items.
Cool.
To, I think, review that language that we felt really confident, but also that, this is something we will have to address and be accountable to.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, we can, as a body, now say, okay, here's our directive from this plan adopted by the city. Here's how we're going to approach it, so that we can come back at the end of 5 years, or hopefully sooner than that, and say, here are the deliverables, and here's how we approach that.
Totally.
And whether that's been ambitious enough, successful enough, or we've gone beyond, and here's how we did that.
Yeah. And we're also starting, it's hard because we're starting at such a deficit that improvement will get us to a point of not drowning anymore, but we still need like to be on an oxygen machine. It's like, I'm not sure, I'm on the metaphors tonight. I don't know. And that's hard to understand. And I would just really, it's really hard because, you think about, who is burdened by this plan. It's government, it's private landowners, it's the whole community. But I feel like certainly folks who are developers or are builders or are looking to have projects in the future feel like this is something that's sort of on them in a way that is a task versus like a opportunity sometimes, and making sure that it's understanding that, like, yes, we have these goals and we meet them, but the goals get us to this point of not totally collapsing anymore. And that's really hard to understand sometimes. So, which is why I like, honestly, just having if there's places where we can have specific numbers broken out, I think that's really nice versus percentages can feel kind of oppressive sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
Which is maybe where that 10% of what the existing is comes in that instance. We can say we need 160. And once we have 160, cool, we did that thing. Okay, what's the next step? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for addressing that, both of you. Well, all of you.
All right. Do we have, so question about process. Obviously, we're just making a recommendation on what's in front of us right now. Could we say something like subject to potential breakout of additional numbers and percentages, clarifications? What would be the way to make that recommendation
Yeah,
of the housing plan with those
I
flags?
think as we're coordinating among multiple entities here, I think advancing the plan is a priority for sure. But within that, if there are specific elements or even broader elements that we want to recommend it, but we'd love to see this move forward. That's 100% a recommendation, can not quite condition, but an aspect of the recommendation, similar to what we've recently done with some of our other zone changes, is you can couple that where our positive recommendations contingent on that we feel that these things be established. And then of course, city council will review that, and then how the plan responds or doesn't will be observed in that way. But that process wise, that would be, I think a staff recommendation is to advance with whether it, a negative or positive, I'm not trying to be positive, but that those are broken out additionally. I probably within a tabling aspect seems maybe not functionally prudent at this point.
Great.
But of course, if there is anything glaring, I think everyone wants to get the plan right.
No, I
for sure.
I don't think there's anything glaring, certainly. I think it's data. It's hard to have like glaring data. I mean, it's sad data, but yeah, would anyone like to make a recommendation? Could be a positive recommendation as usual. We could continue it if we have other direction we want to give staff or things we need, or a negative recommendation to the city council. As usual, that is in recommended motion form in your packets. Carolyn, you want to do the honors as part of the housing task force?
I'm just staring you down.
I know, we're like, let's let Carolyn do.
It's an honor. I move that the City of Moab Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to City Council on the adoption of the 2023 Moab Area Affordable Housing Plan.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn, for the motion. Do we have a second?
I'll gladly second that.
All right, second, motion by Carolyn, second by Miles. Any other discussion? All right, I think Luke can adequately relay the conversation to City Council if the motion passes. So I don't particularly feel the need to amend that to have the condition or anything. I think it's kind of in there and y'all will potentially even account for that. Okay, we'll take a vote. Corey, want to just do a vote whenever you're ready by name?
Sure, we can do a roll call.
For Eve's sake.
Sure. Right. For our roll call vote, Carolyn?
Aye.
Miles?
Aye.
Jill?
Aye.
Kaya?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes 5-0.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. This is like really, it's just really great to have. And the idea that it's going to be updated on a regular basis, I think is really important. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Some
Thank you for your hard work. I will use that data wisely.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
I want to say like, thank you, people that make me feel better about the future of my life. Get all like. All right. Thank you for your patience, other city staff who are here patiently waiting for their presentations. Next, we have a workshop on water efficient landscaping ordinance update and ordinance amending the approved Moab City Ordinance 2023-08 to include additional regulations for water features and resolve code section referencing issues within the text of the Moab Municipal Code. All right.
And we might break this into multiple presentations. So I think Alexi's going to kick us off with
Cool.
what was the immediate directive from City Council. And then Anna does have some materials that we can reference as well,
Great.
and kind of go from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Alexi, whenever
I
you're ready.
All right, so you're probably aware that the thing they sent us back to Planning Commission for was the definition of a water feature, and to set a threshold for what a water feature is. We looked for any kind of reasonable way to define this. It's not common for other city codes to do this, to define what a water feature is. We also talked to our consultants, and they talked to Castle Rock, Colorado, who was the origin of this water feature regulation. And they said that they are so rare that they have had no issues with it. Nobody has come to them with questions about what a water feature is. So that was also not a useful source for information. The reason why this was in the code in the first place is because water features can have evaporation based on wind speed, surface area, temperature. It can also just blow water out of the fountain entirely so that it's on the sidewalk or in somebody's yard. So that was the impetus for having this in the code, and having a way to define it is difficult based on existing information. We had Bryce in the planning office try to come up with some kind of guideline for us, and she started on evapotranspiration rates to give us an idea of what the scale of the issue might be. This is very ballparked because it varies by climate, wind speed, temperature, size of the fountain, how high is the drop, the surface area. So just for a general scope, we could be talking about on small end, something like 5 gallons of evaporation per day, or on somewhere on a larger end, perhaps 10 gallons of evaporation per day. It would really depend on the fountain and conditions. Again, the way we can mainly lose the water would be through evaporation and also just blowing it outside the basin, so it would evaporate outside of the fountain. Okay, so we were thinking about ways that we could define the fountain, or to try to create a threshold for at what point you would need a wind shutoff feature on your fountain. One would be to try to keep the water in the basin. So it'd be your height of free fall versus the surface area of the basin. It could be the height of the free fall or spray, because the fountain could be shooting water into the air or having it come down. The surface area of the water feature, Bryce pointed out, was the primary issue here. So how much water is available to evaporate? There are pumps of different sizes and fountains and basins of different volumes of water, so we could do it that way. We could also do it just by zoning, like you can have a fountain only with a wind shutoff if you are, for example, in a commercial zone, but not if you're in a residential, then you don't have to have a wind shutoff. So those are some of the options. When we talked to building department, they said that the height of the free fall or the height of the fountain is probably the easiest way for them to code enforce this, because it's a simple measurement, whereas the others would be more complicated. Would anybody else from planning like to add to this?
No, I think with that, the only additional component we added to that building aspect is a cumulative effect, because I think as we saw with particular fountain examples, they might have a particular free fall that is just a matter of inches, and then a cascading element, and then another free fall. And if we're having to measure those independently, well, none of it adds up to a particularly poor rate, but cumulatively maybe it would. So anyway, that was the only thing, as I think you can tell where we're probably going with this. That was the only additional component to the original building comment.
As far as heights, we did talk about ranges of heights. We wanted to do this, and the city council, when they were discussing it, did discuss both the volume metric and the height metric, or having both. As far as height, one of the thresholds we considered was that a fence over 6 feet becomes engineered. So it is unlikely somebody would have a fountain over 6 feet, and it would be taller than a hypothetical privacy fence, and it would be potentially an engineered feature if it went over 6 feet. So that was one threshold that we did discuss as staff.
So I'll say after a fairly quick cursory search of what expenses involved in having a wind shutoff function for a water feature, I would be inclined to see both volume and height of a free fall as a good metric, and maybe in tandem for when this is required. But at the fairly reasonable expense, I think that in a place like this where we have limited water resources, period, requiring that at a fairly small water feature level and up for both commercial and residential, I think is a very reasonable thing. The one I found was a whole system for like $700. It's not, I mean, if you're gonna have a fountain, that's not a huge expense in my opinion.
That's tough.
With this element, I think it is characterized really similar to how many of the aspects of landscape ordinance were characterized, which is for those of us that are locals, those of us in our residential neighborhoods, don't touch our stuff. For those of us in the commercial districts and that are operating to tourism, well, let's make sure that that's being taken care of. And I think from at least our perspectives, well, it doesn't matter who it is, we're looking at these features independently. So it is a little bit challenging to wade through the rationale to separate those things. So we, again, based on height and flow, particularly, you're kind of getting to a range of, well, what if you went up to Home Depot and you had a cascading element, does it require shut off? It's like, well, that's not really reasonable, but okay, you have an engineered product. Okay, that $700 of your maybe multi-$1,000 feature is not
a huge expense
in this climate, like you say, in this particular instance. But I think the council did have, at least for a couple of the council members, that wasn't quite, I think, the direction they were hoping to see out of staff. So I think, as Alexi's pointing out, what we're providing feedback. We did the research, there wasn't any conclusive data. How might the planning commission recommend we move forward? But
Would the city need an automatic wind shut off at Old City Park?
Depends on the threshold.
and this is another interesting piece. That would be following to the legal non-conforming aspects of things.
Yeah.
So if it is
Yeah.
an existing feature,
Yeah,
which also gets down into permitting. If you go and buy a Home Depot fountain, we're not permitting those.
yeah,
But then if we do an audit because you're doing a full landscaping review, then we're going to be
Yep.
reviewing that. But so anybody out there with a fountain right now, this feature probably won't affect you unless you come in and do either building permit improvements or major landscaping improvements.
Mhm.
But
I also wonder with an idea of evaporation being another issue, the wind blow off and the evaporation being two major like loss functions, like if we could do it based off height and surface area, because it's one thing to have like a very broad and shallow pond, and it's another thing to have like a deeper one that you would, I don't know, have koi fish or something in. And so if we could just say like, I don't know, it's hard with very little data on it, but the idea of like more than 4 to 6 square feet of surface area becomes like a feature that, if you have something that is 4 to 6 square feet and then it also has a pump and some amount of free falling water, that's something you're putting a decent amount of expense into in your yard. And that is something that is going to account for a decent amount of evaporation and water loss. So that seems like something that a reasonable like mediation thing, like a wind shut off, so that you don't have a massive amount of water loss every time we get windy in the spring, seems like a pretty reasonable ask as far as I'm concerned, because again, that'll be bigger than anything you can truck home at Home Depot.
The wind shut off isn't really addressing the problem of like a large surface area losing water to evaporation though, right?
Only in so much as that if you have a wide or tall fountain, you'd be creating surface area through the drip or the spray. We currently for pools or spas have in there that we would encourage covers on those, but this isn't a, I mean, unless the planning commission recommends that as well, this would not change the specific like surface area. This would just do a wind shut off, which would mainly affect water that was either being sprayed up or falling down.
Because this doesn't necessarily change anything having to do with the water budget of having a large water feature in your yard. It's just about whether or not you should have a wind shut off feature with that water feature.
Yes.
And the other way that the surface area could impact this is if you have, as you were kind of getting to, like a tall fountain with a very small pool and the wind picked up, it would be blowing your fall outside of the fountain basin.
Sure.
Just seems like kind of a weirdly specific part of the whole equation to try to regulate so specifically.
I think that's a really key point to that. I think staff has brought that up as well, is that the number and occasions in which we're going to be dealing with this are probably very few and far between. So to how much of a degree are we wanting to put particular emphasis, or at what lengths, is a good question for staff capacity. We have to keep that in mind as well. We could put some really, when we get into the dark skies, I think I have a really good example of this as well. It's like, we could go to the length of having a full schematic review of all of these things, and it would be scientifically sound, but is that a reasonable ask? Both given staff capacity and then also the frequency in which we're going to be reviewing these items. But also to the nature, when we talk to our consultants, like this is moving, and I think Miles' comment captures this. Our community, our region, this is an appropriate direction to go, but we're kind of caught between that rock and hard place. So I think we're having a really good conversation now. It's going to be, do we file into a particular direction?
It's a strange ask, especially where we can't find anything, because I just think the only fountain I know of is the one on Main Street at the hotel. I don't know anybody who has a fountain. And I can think of like those water features that are a ball that just kind of roll around, or maybe one that bubbles up in the rock. And I just don't see large fountains everywhere. So, you know, and if it's going to blow, it'll probably blow into your own yard and your own flower bed. I don't know. So my inclination is that we don't make it too difficult, because like you said, what is the manpower that's going to monitor this? And how often are we really going to come across something like this? I think it's going to be very minimal. I think it's nice to put something in if somebody decides, maybe some of these big homes that they're building are going to have a very large water feature. I don't know, but you know, so maybe for them it's more applicable, and maybe we go, okay, for every foot, not over 6 feet, because I think that's a reasonable. That's a really big fountain.
That's where, yeah,
I think if they do that, we have Alexi going around with the bell going, shame.
Right, exactly. So, you know, I mean, but then if you're putting koi thing, you know, fish, don't they need the bubble to, I don't know,
and I
to live? I don't know. If you shut it off, will they die? You know, I don't know. I just think we should keep it
I mean, I will say,
simple.
you can do aerators within a pond that don't
Yeah.
require spraying water, that will
Yeah.
keep your pond living.
Like living, yeah. I think we should just, you know,
Can you
this
actually
much
kill
area
koi? I
and
don't think You
height.
can kill koi fish.
I don't know.
Well, I think they were concerned. I mean, one of the reasons I have the image of this thing up is that they were like, what is the threshold? Is it like 2 feet? Is it 3 feet? If I have a cascade, does that count? So, I mean, I think for the most part, we all agree that 6 feet is some kind of waterfall. But it is a little more ambiguous if you look at somebody's rock cascade, whether that's a waterfall or not.
And this is why I would encourage, like, literally a metric, for example, that if you have more than 4 square feet of surface area or more than 4 feet of height, you are then required to get this wind shut off.
Yeah.
Because honestly, a 4-foot tall fountain, even if it's just one of those ones where it pours out over a carved piece of stone or something, you know, if the wind hits that hard enough, it's going to blow the water off of it, maybe into your own flower bed. But theoretically, if it's topping itself off or you're filling it up every day because that's
That's a lot
being
of
blown
water.
away, then that's a loss. And if you have a pond with no pouring water, but it's, you know, 6 feet by, you know, 6 feet of surface area, well, that's going to have its own loss with evaporation. And that one may not even require or be able to be fitted with a wind shut off because it's just a pond. But I think some kind of general metric like that, again, we'll run into this issue so infrequently. And if there's really no data to base it on, then I mean, unfortunately, we're just kind of left with creating an estimate.
It sounds like we have a 4 and/or 4 metric proposal right now, 4 square feet of surface area and/or 4 feet of drop.
I will
Is what that
defer
sounded like
to
to me.
our contractor
Right.
in the
That's what
in the
I'm
room.
Ponds.
Not yet. Now people will
Apparently
be like,
not.
oh, I heard that planning commission member knows how to make a
And then
pond.
I'll learn how to fit anemometers to them so they shut themselves off when it's windy.
There we go.
That, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
4 and/or 4 sounds.
I mean,
good to me.
Alexi, y'all have done more research on this, obviously, than anyone. Is there any number that sort of jumps out besides the 6 foot? This
Yeah.
is an obvious thing.
I think the number we actually came up with in our discussions was 4 feet of free fall.
I'll take it.
This was not meant to
Been
be
a
a guessing
prize.
game, but
Yeah, it could be. All right. Yeah, I think
Sounds good.
something like that. I get what you're saying. I think that
This was
surface
based off
area, surface
Yeah.
area and height.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I picked 4 feet is because to me, a water feature that is 4 feet tall or has 4 feet of surface area is like a fairly significant thing. It's not the, you know, thing you bought at Home Depot. It's something you actually had to dig a hole in your yard to build. And so at that point, it might as well have this small piece of infrastructure that helps it lose a little less water than it would otherwise.
Without leading you guys too much, we, I think, came to a really similar perspective
We-
where we had
yeah.
landed, where we had landed as staff.
so this is our attempt to help with language. Corey came up with it when we were talking to our consultants, and then we just what I did is I just started creating different options depending on what you came up with.
Gosh, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
Very good.
As we're looking at this, I think this is kind of where we landed anyway. Versus we'll pick one of these. It could be that we're picking multiple or all of these.
It could be.
And it's that, again, multi-pronged approach of maybe and/or for the initial 2, but then the standalone as the third can be also an option where where commercial enterprises or maybe they are having large cascades, but maybe not a lot of surface area, whatever it is, it could just be covered by zone, given particular uses permitted in that zone. So we're not super attached to maybe that third piece, but whatever the commission's recommended language would be, this would work for us, at least language wise. So good, well done. Language.
So in the third one, you're looking for something like commercial zones and large lot residential zones or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think the initial idea based off some council discussions was just commercial zones, period. We could maybe loop in commercial zones, industrial zones. That commercial zones do also include residential uses, and those typically are more large scale development. So like the C4, for example, is a general commercial zone, but it houses large multi-household developments, so that it'd be lumped into this. If they want to have a big water feature at the front of their apartment, they would have a wind shut off despite that. So I don't think that's essential to get it to what the council's directive was, but that would be an additional piece you could recommend if you'd like. But the first 2 get directly at the council's initial directive.
And my intention of putting these down was I had no idea what you would decide on. So it was just different ways that you could have a number you could plug in or a zone. So whatever is helpful is what you could use.
I like 4 and 4. Throughout all zones. Keep it simple.
Hey, give it a shot and see how this
Going
goes.
for it through all zones. Yeah, so we'll just eliminate that zone thing and we'll just apply to
'Kay.
all uses, all zones. It's just
Yeah.
those first two metrics. Sounds good.
I was going to motion to amend the approved Moab City Ordinance 2023-08 to include the necessity for a wind shutoff feature for all water features with a cumulative free fall greater than 4 feet and or a surface area greater than 4 feet. 4 feet squared.
Are we doing a recommended motion? We're just doing a
This is a
workshop.
workshop,
This is just a
but that's
workshop.
okay to say that.
Oh, okay.
Sounds good. We
Yeah,
got
I
it
was
for the
like-
next-
I was putting that
Write
together.
it
I was
down,
like,
Linda.
all right,
Yeah.
sounds like this
That's
is
He's
a big.
ready.
exactly.
Yeah.
Ready. We're
So
ready.
that when we do come back for public hearing.
Yeah.
Will be probably baked in language that we'll have prepared.
Great.
There we go.
And so
Nice
we'll
job,
come-
Miles.
Ready.
He's
I was
excited.
Like, this makes sense to me and.
come back to the minutes and make sure
I
we're
like
referencing
it.
that.
Yeah,
that
We
language.
will.
Yeah.
That'll be great.
sweet.
Perfect.
Look at us being more than pretty faces today.
I know, we're so
So
with it.
I think that covers that first item.
Yes. I have one
There.
question
Oh,
about
Mikhail
this.
has a
Is there anything in there? I read through and I found the language in the definition about the overspray, the over irrigation type thing. Is there any conversation happening about doing the same kind of thing for that, where we see water running down the street because somebody's left their water on, or water spraying in the street?
Oh, that's normally a water right that
Mhm.
that's happening. for a
So
purpose.
if we're,
Mhm.
you know, talking about this, you know, water waste from a water fountain,
Yeah.
is this gonna address
I think
that
the
over irrigation?
irrigation criteria system does account for that, both in separations from where that overspray would be and how the location. So I think and Lexi can correct me, but I think the irrigation criteria system covers that for what we'll call typical irrigation, so overspray and those types of
Okay.
things.
Yeah, I
think
mean,
it's
we don't cover
accommodated.
specific like water rate type things, but we do.
Yeah, so
regulate
running down the
kinds
street,
of-
that's kind of a separate issue with Moab Irrigation Company and
Mhm.
open air channels.
Mhm.
But specific to it, like I think your comment of somebody just with a sprinkler that's on, that's
It's
overspraying into the
just
street.
spraying
and
right
it's
onto
just
the
going,
sidewalk in the street, yeah.
that would be handled during a redevelopment or new permit that we're evaluating. We would probably have that irrigation system remodeled to not.
Yeah,
form in
and
that way.
there are some different parts of that that are intended to minimize overspray.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, a broken fixture is a broken fixture.
Sure, sure.
So I think our code enforcement at that point, we're not grass police, but a code enforcement at that point could say, we know that's not compliant within the ordinance, and so we could actually pursue that through code enforcement.
Mhm.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
Anna, if you're
curious.
And
ready,
that's next, yeah.
we have what this next category is framing more of some of the updates. So within our existing municipal code, areas that we're referencing code sections that don't exist anymore, or that are maybe developed in a way that are in discrepancy with what we've just passed. So this is purely a cleanup of now that we have this ordinance in, going back and doing an audit in our code, making sure it has the cleanups that we need. So if there aren't any immediate active discrepancies. So obviously, and this is something we can talk about a little bit after Anna, is the broader discrepancy between multiple language areas covering landscaping specifically, but that's something with the RFP and the rewrite. We hope to capture all of those things at a later date, but these are more pressing.
Okay, so pretty much every section in our ordinance is going to be affected by the new landscape ordinance. As you can see, there's a big list here of this. I think what we were proposing to do, since we are having a complete ordinance rewrite in the process right now, we're trying, it's just get the minimal done to get it functional until we get the complete rewrite on it. Which means changing the language in the areas that directly reference the existing ordinance, to update it to the new ordinance. And a couple of examples of these is to go from, you know, the 17.09 section of our current ordinance to just referencing to 17.10 landscaping ordinance. And all the sections that directly affect that. And then there's also going to be things like with our buffering requirements, we're going to want to update that to reflect, you know, what our buffering requirements are now. And this is kind of repetitive throughout the ordinance. There are also going to be a lot of sections in the ordinance that may be duplicates or again repetitive to what our landscaping ordinance says right now. But we're still considering holding that off because we are going to have such a drastic rewrite of our current ordinance. You know, how far into this do we want to go? And what I submitted was just basically everything in the ordinance that could potentially be affected by the new landscaping ordinance. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll change it at this point. And so we're just kind of here to discuss our options as far as that goes. Michael, our director, may also be our community economic director, might have some additional comments on this, and of course Corey and you all as well. So if you have any questions or need clarification, please let me know.
Well, I think and summed it up, I think, pretty well.
If it's all right.
Hi, Michael.
Hi. Hi, everybody. So if it's okay.
Would
I'll
you
just-
mind terribly just saying your
Oh,
name for the
No
minutes?
problem at all. Michael Black, I'm the Community Development Director for Moab. So I just wanted to just say really quick, you know, all of these, I think Anna has done a great job at pointing out all of the areas where we need to look at where there's inconsistencies now because of the new ordinance. But we could probably do this with almost everything, subdivisions, all kinds of things that we're looking at. And so it's not unique that there are issues within the total zoning code where there's inconsistencies. In fact, that's the main reason why we're putting an RFP out to get a consultant to come in and help us to bring our code up to date and to bring it into consistency with state codes and with the new codes that like this one that we've written. So I think it could be somewhat redundant to launch into this, and we may just end up finding more stuff that we need to do. And before we could get finished, we might be at that point where we are working with the consultant on the larger picture, which the Planning Commission will be involved in. As far as where we are with the RFP, we're hoping to get it out by the middle of next week and having the city council potentially approve it in the meeting in December. That's a potential very, very tight time frame, but it's a high priority for the mayor and city administration to get this moving along. So I would suggest that we put a pin in this with the other 1,000 things that we need to look at and pick those up when we do the bigger review.
Cool. Any questions before? I think we have good direction on water feature. I think we have pretty good direction. This is really coming from staff, and again, a clerical cleanup. So we'll again propose this draft with these essential changes, but then the exhibits that were provided we are going to keep as a living and continuing reference as we get engaged in the RFP. So if there's anything that we can always reference back to that, as if you're reading into the future or anything else, don't feel it's going to be forgotten. So, but I think that for landscaping covers most of what our materials are going to be tonight. So before we conclude, any other comments, questions, or direction?
I feel like I should comment that the public may not understand how time consuming and all involved that it is to rewrite ordinances like this in great detail. And I would like to express my appreciation and just acknowledge that that's a lot of work and a lot of time. And you're doing that on behalf of the public and the people that live here. So thank you
Heck yeah.
for that.
Second that.
Second that.
Do we want to mention the part? So when we were putting the code in to be entered on the city
sure.
website, they told us that we didn't have an official motion to strike the stuff that it was replacing. So just as a notification, officially striking all of the things that this replaced may come up with the revisions that Anna has on the list for their sake.
So our
Cool.
the draft that went all the way through you and most of the way through city council demonstrated those red lines throughout. And then on the final, or what was titled pre-final draft, was requested to be clean.
Oh, no.
But because that was what was
Oh, no.
demonstrated during the meeting, the code publishing says those strikes aren't in that draft. So we're going to have continuing conversations with them. But and
If
I
you see
double
them
checked
again,
all
that's
of our
what
drafts
happens.
earlier today. They were all there. So I think it's just unfortunately a quick misunderstanding on there. But
Have to re-enter them.
well, again, to this whole point, if anything, any applications coming in now, it's a clear direction. So we're not going to run into any functional issues with it. It's just a matter of clarity of like, we're working now with these publishers in a much more close relationship. We'll know the ins and outs for them. But yeah, that was a neat comment from them. But it should be codified fairly soon, I would think.
Yeah.
Which will be really neat to see it actually engaged on the code website.
Nice.
Yeah, that was good for just a little preview. Wait a minute, I thought we did this already.
Yeah, I think that's it for me.
Okay. So don't go too far because if we're ready, we can jump into the next item. And I know it's late. I know everyone's been here quite a while. So both of these ordinances, like I said, we're going to be very busy in the month of November and very, very busy in the month of December, only likely to have one meeting each in those months. So now through the end of October is kind of really go time for us. So we're going to be pushing dark sky as well. I think the mayor has particular interest in advancing that for approval prior to the end of the year, with one of the council members being one of the original authors, wanting to see him vote for approval prior to him leaving his position. So if we want to quickly go through that as best we can, I have a quick presentation on this, but let me see how this works that I'm hosting. Okay, we'll give it a try. Hopefully everything doesn't shut down. Okay, this is a presentation that's been recycled from a year ago, almost exactly, which is pretty wild for how long we've been working on this update. But again, what the real purpose of this workshop is tonight is to get Alexi fully up to speed as a sustainability director, and then also into this new line of we're actually advancing this process now. So we will be coming back likely with a public hearing pretty quick, probably the 9th of November for this ordinance. So I know you've seen this and we've brought this up a couple times incrementally to keep it fresh.
Could I pause real quick just to say we are officially on to item 5.2.
Thank you.
Now,
Yes.
which is another workshop, but this time on outdoor lighting, dark sky ordinance update, amending the approved Moab City Ordinance 2019-03 to include additional regulations required through the International Dark Sky Association certification and resolve outstanding discrepancies within existing regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So right into the presentation, we can quickly see when the approval of the ordinance originally was dated, as well as what is quickly approaching is that amortization date of immediate termination. The additional push to have this resolved is as we're working our certification process, that has been a continually moving target. Every year that we haven't certified, they've added additional requirements. We have to continually keep updating our draft to keep up for compliance with them. But I think based on my last discussions with Richard, when he was operating as our sustainability Vista, we're still in good compliance. And I think Lexi is now coordinating with one of the reviewing associates at IDA. And then in addition to that, we found that throughout our review process in the last 4 years, there were immediate code discrepancies and chafing elements that we saw as staff as advantageous to resolve. Some of those are big, some of those are lighter weight. So when we go through this, you're going to remember some of these really cutesy terms that we ended up developing. And then this is existing graphic within our municipal code. But what, yeah, so what this is a really quick demonstration of even within the IDA materials. So this was, we brought this on from IDA website that is in our code now, is not actually how light functions. And so the understanding of light is what has created discrepancies of how we're actually proposing things. So this is, very bad lighting, bad, better, best. But what's actually being shown here, and this is going to correlate to when we talk about directed illumination, is this is actually what the light is doing. So with these lasers, if you can imagine, this field from this laser beam up, everything to the left of this beam will be illuminated. Everything to the right of this beam will be illuminated. But what you can see is here, what they're showing is their illumination field. That's what we're working towards as defining as directed illumination, meaning this is really where the light is intended, or maybe not intended, but where it happens to be actually focusing its high, the cone of high illumination is how we've termed it. But there's also a lot of light spill, glare, kind of using the bug rating type language that has led to a lot of people being dissatisfied with what's actually going on, is because they thought they were getting a lot of dark. And it's like, that's not actually what the language proposes. So you can see something like this. There's a lot of uplight even associated with what they're kind of showing as a horizontal plane of illumination. And something like this is the best example, kind of going into this. This is, if we want to imagine a light box within a illumination aspect, so a bulb, if you want to call it that, inside a fully compliant fixture. So this red box is the exterior of the fixture. This is kind of what everyone thinks is happening when we get a fixture like that. So maybe this is a porch, and this is even a can light. It's recessed into a building. Maybe there's a neighbor over here, a property line. This is what's actually happening. Yep. So that illumination field is actually being seen at that horizontal plane. That is, we'll get there in a little bit.
You can't just flash
Isn't
cookies
that-
and a carrot on the screen.
Just trying to make sure you're
Not at
awake.
this time of night.
So no, again,
Marcy
so
is
when
out
we're
of candy right now.
I know it's when we're talking about these things, it's without going too much into it, I think this is a really practical amendment that needs to happen, even though it's maybe not consistent with what a lot of the common language is, or even what some of the current understanding is. So we have to, I think, have these bigger discussions specifically about this one particular element, which is directed versus direct illumination. I know we're not into the code. I'm going through this old slideshow. All right, carrots and cookies. Everyone's awake now. That's the cutesy term that we basically generated for within development. There are within light as a tool, a number of things where light is actually required for safety purposes, or required circulation elements. What we're kind of calling our carrots, things that are good for us and healthy, whatever it is. But then there's obviously a number of illumination fixtures which are purely aesthetic, purely because it adds a character. It's not really serving a practical function. But within our code, it said all light needs to be purpose driven. Well, what if your aesthetic is your purpose? That's reasonably debatable that that's a compliant reason to have lighting. But where it came into even more pressing element is that within the lumen thresholds that we put in place, a property might be developing, and because of the number of doors, because of the number of pathways, because of the number of circulation areas that they had, they would have totally compliant lighting, the right temperature, the right fixtures, everything it is. But the simple number that would be required to throw the appropriate amount of light exceeded what our lumen cap was to even get the bare minimum requirement of lumen fixtures. So obviously when we set the lumen cap, we said that seems about right for that type of property to be illuminating off. But what wasn't in place at the time is evidence, case-based evidence to say that might not be enough, because there's variables subjective to each site. So what option would be is you say you have to decrease the number of units you have based because your lumen count. So we're now governing density based off of lighting, which is a really weak argument, especially if we are going up against state interests saying, wait, what are you doing? Your density is what, but you're decreasing density because there's too many lights. It gets maybe not super enforceable at that point. So again, what we're looking into here are highlighted major changes, or what I'll call major changes, but they're clarifications really into a functional ordinance. So the direct illumination is one, emergency and safety lighting another, and temporary lighting being kind of a third looser one. So when we're talking about safety lighting, I'm meaning specifically kind of you can't have a residential property and say, oh, I need this safety light because I like to knit in my backyard. It's like, no, that's not going to qualify. But you know, specifically around emergency services, that's where we're going to see safety lighting, police services. It's the feeling that those need to be illuminated. And if we have a problem that helipad is too close to a residential zone, we just had the same discussion about industrial zones. Maybe that zone's in the wrong place then, not that the zone is being accurately used. So again, I think we've had a really good trial run at how the differences of use versus zone can be articulated in such a small community. But then we have these temporary fixtures, and this is a little bit out there, especially for IDA, is our community really wanting to utilize bistro lights and kind of globe ball temporary plug-in illumination. Now, this is not an obligation. This was a directive we were kind of given by administration at the time and commission at the time that we're all on board with advancing bistro lights with conditions. So that's essentially where we're at here. Without getting too much into anything else, I think I've covered the main pieces of that. The only difference, so within the draft language, all of these things are encapsulated, obviously. But the only thing that is slightly different when I was talking to Richard this morning that we might change on the language that's in there now is about exempting safety lighting, or what we'll call our carrots. Just saying, as long as it's required, you can have as many lumens as you want. As still maintaining a lumen threshold, but allowing all safety lighting to cross that threshold, but then it eliminates any opportunity for cookie or aesthetic lighting. So if your safety lighting requires you to go to 90% of your lumen total, well, that only gives you 10% of aesthetic lighting before you hit your lumen cap. That seemed a little bit more reasonable than just saying, well, this is all exempt, but then you would still have a lumen cap for aesthetic lighting that could be really high. So you end up having double the lighting. So that was just a little clarification that we amended. We feel confident about that will take, I think, with everybody, but it's been quite a long conversation evening. I don't want to dwell on this too much further, but as we are going to be advancing this ordinance pretty rapidly, I'm hoping everyone had at least some time to work through the ordinance language. And if there's any glaring aspects of, hey, this isn't what I remember us talking about, or I'd like to see this change, or it's not severe enough. Those are really good to get now through this workshop. We'll pre-vet it the best we can before our next public hearing, but when we come before you next time, it's probably going to be in more or less a pre-final, I like that term, a pre-final draft form that is, of course, always open to amendments, recommendations, anything else. But we're going to try to get this shored up pretty quick. I do know the mayor, as well as some of the original Dark Sky working group team, is working on some additional amendments on the side. So this might be a bit of an interesting opportunity to have Luke, if you want to come share some of what those are and how that might direct where that pre-final draft comes in. Mel, we're going to get you in this podium here pretty quick, I swear. Yeah. Poor Mel's being a trooper.
Yeah, so little tweaks, maybe not so little. The focus of the conversation that I had was really, I think the priority is really kind of clearing out the amortization period and kind of like coming into legal compliance. And then there was that distinction between like light trespass versus what I was told is glare. So kind of like things outside of the, was it the cone of maximum light or highest light or whatever, there's some concerns with the kind of ambiguity of the cone of maximum light. I believe the council member like couldn't find like a very specific definition of what it was. And it's one of those things that as a light is pointing down, like the maximum light is straight down. And as you continue to go out further and further, it diminishes. And so are we literally saying like a straight line down? And so there was review of other community ordinances regarding this. And the suggestion that was made just to simplify it, and this is partly taking into consideration the fact that at a planning stage, like at a permitting stage, I think in terms of directed light, like staff can make an assessment as to, is this being directed within like the property boundaries? But it's really hard to ascertain how that glare is going to actually spread to other properties. And since we have a primarily complaint-based enforcement system, it is going to be our local residents who are going to need to understand what this is and how are we going to concisely and clearly explain what like the cone of maximum like light is. And so a suggestion to simplify it is basically like, can you see the luminaire? Like,
Which, can I jump in really quick? I'm so sorry, I forgot. This is, first of all, the amortization is a huge change. It falls far more into the legal non-conforming established nature, similar to our landscaping, versus amortization, which is the original goal. We should definitely circle back. I feel bad having breezed through that. That's a big change. But with this, this particular element, what I was talking about feasibility. So if I can jump in really quick, an example is we have an actual example of a required light. It was a can light under an overhang on a second story in a residential neighborhood. That light was required by the building department to provide illumination for that portal. We'll call it that. But because of its particular location of the property and because of its particular height, it was 100% compliant in all aspects except for the light trespass. And so what I would say is versus trespass, we'd call non-directed illumination is the antithesis to the directed illumination versus glare. What was bug lighting terminology? Glare, uplighting, backlighting. So essentially what we would have had to have done again is say, you can't have a door there, or your egress would have to be oriented in a way, or your illumination features would have to be out of what would be typically ordinary, meaning you're having to illuminate. An example that was used at that particular instance was your handrail would have to have a mounted illumination feature that is actually shining back towards the home. That's an atypical LED configuration as opposed to what would be an overhead light, whether that's even building safety compliant. I'm not entirely sure, but the point was we're actually now governing residential construction style based off lighting, which is not, I think, the original intention of the ordinance. It was just to preserve community nighttime non-nuisance related lighting. But I will say from IDA's perspective, we've checked that the light trespass is not a requirement that the IDA requires within our ordinance. So this is something we put on our own selves to advance. But when earlier I was talking about we can, with the water feature, we can do all the crazy scientific math to determine those types of elements. And I'm sorry for everyone online. I've got my handy dandy whiteboard here. What I'm showing on the whiteboard is basically a can light feature with a number of beams heading off with little angular identifiers. So it's a math problem. The higher up your illumination is based on your shielding.
Dang it, Corey.
And the width of which that illumination spread is, or surface area of that illumination. And based on those angles, you could determine what your non-illuminated area versus illuminated area, non-directed area versus directed area. So there's a mathematical way to secure that. What that would require is for our building department, our planning department, sustainability department, it's for every fixture to run this math problem for every fixture. So I understand directed illumination based on the definition we made is somewhat ambiguous. We have the right to do that. I know that's hard to swallow, and the temptation is to think of us as the zoning administrator as a tyrannical light czar. That wouldn't be the case. But knowing that we, within our best interest, are trying to say, okay, based on this particular feature type, this is what the directed cone of illumination would be, despite there being some degree of non-directed illumination. So that's my pitch. I'm not advocating that we don't want to find a better way. We do. We just have searched and searched, and without going through the scientific formula process for every fixture, we weren't able to find a secure, consistent way to do that outside of what would be a general analysis of how are you proposing the lighting on that subjective property. So it's a problem that we have to resolve. So not saying what we've got is the right way, just that I think the trespass is if we are maintaining any of these items that we're proposing to change, we're proposing to change them because there's been immediate issues within the community of basically we're approving projects that are, well, not to get us into a bad situation, but it's really hard to verify whether they comply or not. And we want to make sure that we do not have a performative ordinance. And this is really where I came up with the term was with the dark skies. It can be really great to have an ordinance that spells out all these really great things. But if it's not practically developable, it's performative. And then that puts the building department and planning in a really hard spot of actually having to wade in what is feasible, or when we have to tell somebody, no, you can't build this permitted use because your lighting doesn't work. Even though you're required to include these lighting elements from different rule books. So that's my big pitch. I didn't mean to steal Luke's thunder on that one, but that was such a pivotal point that I'm really happy to hear that there might be some direction feedback.
Yeah,
from
I
this group.
think like I think it kind of allows for both scenarios, the way that it was explained to me, where there is the very strict regimented, like lights need to be pointing down, kind of like there are ways to make sure that it kind of falls within the criteria at a planning level, but it also adds some language into the code that is easily understandable to residents if they do feel that whatever light bleed into their property is objectionable, which is a term that is used in the municipal code of a couple of other communities that were looked into. Obviously, objectionable is a subjective standard in and of itself, but to a certain degree, I don't know how specific we can necessarily get with that, but that's potentially going to put staff in a weird position where like they are then kind of put as like the final arbiter, and that what might be objectionable can vary from like staff to staff, like interpreting it potentially.
Totally.
So, but yeah, they felt that this type of language kind of takes a little bit more into account, like the glare aspect of it, while also making it somewhat accessible to like residents.
Luke, you mentioned like this could be defined as like, can you see the lighting element?
Yes.
But at the same time, like you're going to get a very different glare from a lighting fixture that has a bare bulb as one that has a diffuser underneath it. Some kind of semi-opaque surface is going to spread that light quite a bit more than something with just a bulb. And theoretically, if you couldn't see like where lighting element is defined, like if it has a diffuser underneath it, is that the lighting element, or can you not see the bulb and therefore you can't see the lighting element?
And so I got some of this alternative language sent a little late on today, and so I haven't I kind of glanced through it, and with that, I think specifically if there is to be any diffuser or anything like that, it has to be like flush with like the recessed light, so it's still directing things down, so you can't have like a curved anything that would then like disperse the light. So I believe that's part of like an attempt that they
Is that new? With that piece, is that they're wanting to continue that, or are they thinking that's a new element? Because that's in our code right now.
Okay.
The problem with that is that I don't mean to pick it apart too much, but that's one of the major pieces of why we went to directed, is that becomes a perceptible analysis. Meaning, again, if you're say 5'5", and there is a home that is 100 feet away, and that bulb is perfectly mounted flush, meets all parameters of IDA standard, but it is set at that 8 foot high under a cornice, that bulb will be perceptible at any horizontal distance mathematically, period. So when they were talking about, well, you can't see the bulb, that is not, unless it, again, you're using that recessed can to the point that the angle of which the bulb illumination exceeds the shielding depth, that would be when you couldn't see the bulb, but that becomes a proportional distance based on the angle. So my little
And based on
sheet
mounting
here.
height and.
So if you have a
you
second
name it.
story, third story
Mhm.
building, what that ordinance says is you cannot have illumination above 5'5", which is the average human height. That's what that practically translates to. And that's what I think during the original ordinance, the idea is, yeah, you shouldn't be able to see the bulb because it's directed down. But that's what my whole little box demonstration shows, is that you can see that bulb from 1 degree below the horizontal plane anywhere, anywhere, period. Let alone heights and elevations changes. So it becomes a major approving factor that becomes a major issue for us. So,
And I do believe the desire is for recessed lights where like the bulb itself is never really flush with the bottom. At which point like that significantly cuts off the angle. And so I can like read the language where it's like a light fixture must have the top and sides made of completely opaque material such that light only escapes through the bottom of the fixture. Fixtures with translucent or transparent sides or sides with perforations or slits do not qualify as fully shielded. Any glass or diffuser on the bottom of the fixture must be flush with the fixture, no drop lenses. Surrounding structures like canopies, eaves, and patio covers are not to be considered when determining if the fixture is fully shielded unless specifically allowed. So like there is some discretion for staff in like that capacity, and then fully shielded fixtures must be appropriately mounted so that the shielding prevents light from escaping above the horizontal plane and all light is directed downward.
so that's a compliant fixture. It's when we get to trespass or property line is where it becomes issue. So this is just, again, sorry for everyone. This is a super basic drawing. You can't see it. It's a square with a little bulb at the top. Super simple, meant to represent a recessed can. So with that illumination fixture, we're going to only measure from that aspect to the angle of where that shielding is. You've created an angle there, acute angle, that will have a corresponding acute angle of what we'll call non-directed illumination, right? Even at a really deep can. So at a low threshold distance, yeah, you're not gonna be able to see that bulb, but the higher that fixture goes up, the greater this, it's just, geometry, the greater this distance becomes, that now that property line, especially with 7 feet, is not very much, that throw is now well beyond the property line, being even a really deeply recessed can illumination fixture. So unless we get to the point where we're having, again, my whole point is we can do this for every fixture and confirm what we're doing. We do right now, we basically run a photometrics plan, and if they have any lumens passing the threshold, it's non-compliant. That's not perfect. It's creating some issues. It's not great. But the point is we can do this for every fixture. It's just not feasible. So what we're trying to do, because like Luke was saying, we can either do it here or it can be termed objective or objectable. Sorry. Objectionable, thank you, at a later time. But then we're kicking the can around of where that determination or discretionary point would be. And I'd be happy to kick it to planning commission for you guys to be
I don't know if you can.
our vetting folks. But it's, I think the physics of light, how we understand it versus what I think the really kind of more common understanding of light, it doesn't actually pencil out that way in the end. So This is why I think we're so wanting to get into
and
this
I
detail.
I can't like immediately find it in the thing. There was a suggestion to like account for that presented to me. I cannot remember exactly
From
what it-
today.
Yes, and
Okay,
I can.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
can't. I don't want to misrepresent it or misspeak on it.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other things that we talked about. Yeah, with like the safety lighting that we were talking about, how it's kind of exempt from. I know that there's like there's like the unshielded light budget or whatever. That there's still like a cap on that, but like safety lights are exempt. I think what was desired is that there's language added to that the minimum amount of light necessary to meet those requirements is used. So basically, if it's safety lighting, like you can't have like a giant like 10,000 lumen floodlight and well, it's exempt.
A perfect additional example. So portals, doors, egress or ingress have to have a fixture for illumination by building code. But you don't have to have two. So the idea of putting two on there, well, that's one's amenity, one is not. So that'd be a perfect example of, well, aesthetically, maybe you want it to look balanced and have two, but that's not the requirement. So that would be a good example of minimizing. You can't just call it safety lighting and run away with your lighting.
And going to like light trespass and the fact that essentially one fixture could be completely acceptable in one mounting location and completely unacceptable in another. Is there a way that, I hate to say reactive, but like you mentioned, a lot of it comes on a complaint based, like you do your best at the staff level during the, build to determine where the light should be placed to provide the least light trespass. But at some point when it really becomes an issue is when it becomes a complaint-based thing. So could we essentially define an acceptable amount of light trespass that could be measured so that one fixture that's up there on the eave on the second floor could either like, you could go out there and physically measure it and say, X amount of lumens are being trespassed and therefore like this needs to be changed or this falls under the acceptable level that we've defined. Because, again, being able to see the element or not has a little bit of leeway there, depending on whether or not they have a diffuser that's flush with the bottom or that's, recessed a certain amount would change how much light,
Yeah, we talked through this a little bit and it would be really, really difficult to isolate that one light source. Just because there'd be bleed from all the surrounding properties, like depending on like what phase the moon is in.
Sure.
Right.
I mean,
Additionally, that's the structure's built. So if we're approving new construction, so you construct out, build it, and then we're like, actually, never mind. The reason I bring this example up is the IDA checklist actually is proposing that for sign lighting, which in our ordinance, we're kind of going to bat saying, we're not going to do that. Because in a vacuum, like we're saying, like in a perfect world, we'll measure it. I'm not saying yours is a bad example. I'm saying that's the most obvious example. Just measure. What we found is that they were telling us, have them do it. And then if it's wrong, they can't do it. And it's the nit value, if you remember that, which is a reflective element and means you're isolating all these other illumination factors. And then after you eliminate those, you could get the reflective capacity of those nits. We would have had to approve and install that. So we'd be up against saying, you have to change it or remove it after it's done, which is
and there is potentially an
something we
option out
can't
there.
do.
Yeah, if Mercury's in retrograde, it's different.
Yeah.
So to your point, I
Like
think
honestly, how that
trying to
seems at a certain point.
drive what is the intent of the ordinance, and is it being complied with within the fixture type, temperature, and overall lumen calcs. Those are the three legs of the dark sky soul that I think if they're compliant, that's the intent. For dark skies, dark ground is not the intent of this ordinance. I think a lot of things that we get hung up on are trying to create dark ground, not dark sky. And that's getting to trespass, or that light's coming in my window. It's like, well, it's a compliant fixture, therefore it's not going up in the sky, which is the real intent of this. But that's something we'll have to get over. Moab is, they want to see a more aggressive dark sky ordinance where we've gone above and beyond. It's just a grappling mechanism with, is it feasible?
Yeah.
And I guess that was a part of what I was trying to get at with the idea of measuring it, is that there is inevitably going to be light from
Mhm.
other people's properties on your property.
Yeah.
Unless you live in the middle of nowhere, there's going to be some amount of light or light that can be seen, or like you said, when you're eye level with a fixture, even if it's blocks away from you, you're still aware of that fixture, even if its light is not necessarily a large amount of the illumination of your property.
Mhm.
And so being able to go back to some of those complaints or have something where we can say like, unfortunately, we allow for this amount of light to fall on your property one way or another, and that's what we're observing. So, the things around you are.
And that could be with the photometrics plan. That's what we're kind of doing now. Is we're picking our battle, so to speak, of you can't put a light pole on your property line, which our current code wouldn't allow anyway. But sometimes that's the only place to put a light pole. Period.
Well,
to
and
make
let's
create
remember that
accurate
our
illumination.
development plan is infill at this
Right.
point.
Mhm.
Our
Right.
property lines are getting closer and closer together. Our houses are getting closer and closer together, and we put an ordinance in place that doesn't allow
Lighting.
any light or, I mean, bottom line, I think we need to go back and remember what is the purpose of the dark skies ordinance. It's not so that your entire town lives in darkness. We need to remember that the health and safety of the community is paramount to quality of life. And that the International Dark Sky Association has some minimum standards somewhere. And that's really like where the conversation
Mhm.
needs to center around is those things.
Two quick things. There is potentially an option for actually being able to calculate like overflow light. So there is modeling software out there that they literally, like you literally have like the model number of like the lamp or light, and you upload it into the software like on a thing, and it models how like the light would kind of like reflect. And so that's
cool.
the closest thing that I think would be able to like accurately like estimating this. And then in terms of purpose, there's actually a request to include a purpose statement or a section
Absolutely.
at the beginning of the outdoor lighting.
Yeah.
So that particularly for residents, it's what are we trying to accomplish here? And the code
Yeah.
itself is the how are we going to accomplish this?
Yeah, and we've had so much confusion about this in the community, and it's just like people see a street lamp that's like out and needs to have a bulb replaced, and they're like, it's dark skies, that's why I can't see. And we're like, no, it's not what it is. But I think that just sort of, we did this years ago, but I think just reinvigorating the conversation about what this actually means. Like, it's not to, and we talked about this last time, it's not to not have lighting, it's to have effective lighting.
Yes.
And I think that is super, super important.
Yeah, so like just a couple of quick things. This chapter establishes standards for outdoor lighting in order to accomplish the following. So protect against direct glare and excessive lighting, provide safe roadways for motorists, cyclists, and pedestrians, protect and reclaim the ability to view the night sky and help preserve the resident quality of life and the tourist experience, prevent light trespass in all areas of the city, promote efficient and cost-effective lighting, ensure that sufficient lighting can be provided where needed to promote safety and security, to allow for flexibility in the style of lighting fixtures, to provide lighting guidelines, to provide assistance to property owners and occupants in bringing non-conforming lighting into conformance, and to work with other jurisdictions within Grant County to meet purposes of this chapter. And then it kind of goes into a scope as well. So like, this is what this is governing. And so, yeah, kind of just provide the framework for within which people can kind of try to interpret the language of the code itself. So I know like the light trespass and like the purpose statement are like two of the big three. I think the amortization thing is one of the biggest.
Can we jump to that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is one of the biggest concerns. So I think last time as it was proposed by staff was, so initially when the initial ordinance got passed, there was like the 5-year amortization period. And I believe like the International Dark Sky Organization allows for like up to a 10-year amortization period. And it had been suggested to me that we propose once this goes into effect, a 3-year amortization period, but with a couple of caveats that as soon as it goes into effect, all light trespass stuff becomes legal not legal. It becomes
By nuisance lighting, like it's an active violation. So
Yes,
if you have a bulb shining at somebody, it's a violation.
yeah, that's like
Yeah.
immediately addressable.
Yeah.
And then having the after 3 years, then anything that would be legal non-conforming that isn't related to trespass would then be enforceable. I think there was
It's not getting rid of the amortization period. It's essentially just extending it in one respect with the thing that's like, we're not trying to punish people. We just want everybody to like have time beyond notice, slowly move towards this.
yeah.
Effectively replacing certain fixtures.
Mhm.
But the component that feels more needy
Mhm.
right now is the,
Yeah, and so this was kind of talked within the context of like, once that 3-year period hit, yes, like we can rely on resident complaints, but it would also probably require more proactive enforcement.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh. That's
The
not,
enforcement.
that wasn't a laugh. No, I'm coming from working for the
Laugh
county
away.
and answering those enforcement calls constantly about I can see my neighbor's porch light.
yeah.
We need to really consider how much staff time, effort, how much enforcement is going to go into this, because I can tell you that that was a very large number of the calls we got was, I can see my neighbor's porch light, come do something about it right now. And that's a code enforcement officer who has to do that, who has to write the letters, who has to take it to court, who has to address the homeowners association or the neighborhood. Like, that's a lot of,
Mhm.
we need to consider how much time,
No,
effort and dollars we
yeah.
want to throw at this for
And that's
enforcement.
why like there would be kind of the move towards a bit more of a proactive one. So in other communities that have some of these restrictions already put in place, they have staff that I believe once a month go out at night and look for kind of like the most egregious violations in the community. And so it's really trying to knock down like the most invasive or the most objectionable thing. So like immediately, like once it goes into effect, like light trespass, like that's something that like, yeah, I'm blanking on the word. Yeah, it is basically enforceable. And then being a little bit more proactive. At one of the previous council meetings, we had talked about bringing up in the strategic planning this coming January about kind of moving to more of a hybrid enforcement system where there are things that really are in like the community's best interest, like safety and stuff like that, kind of preserving like certain quality of life, that we really should have an incentive to go out there and like proactively enforce, particularly as we have these like pretty consistently like changing municipal codes, because in a complaint-based system, we're basically asking our residents to stay up to date on the municipal code and like be able to understand it. That's a big ask.
Yeah.
And so, and like, it's also potentially an attempt to like mitigate some like intra-neighborhood conflict. We understand that it's going to take more resources, that it's going to take more staff time and all of that. And so that's part of the strategic planning, is figuring out how we can potentially.
I think proactive enforcement actually potentially ideally takes less staff time than a complaint-based system only, because you are sort of going out, like you said, addressing the things that are sort of, for pun intended, glaring concerns. Rather than having it be like my neighbor's porch light, you know, but there are like literal industrial spotlights that shine on the back of entire neighborhoods right now that I know for a fact people have a real trouble getting response on. And like something like this, I think potentially just like point the attention where it should be, instead of having to sort of field all of that. And
Yeah.
I think making sure the community understands that in advance is important too. Being like, You know, if you're one of those folks that's like really, that has your like deer spotlight that comes on every time a squirrel walks by, please understand that you might be getting a call from code enforcement, you
We
know.
need to
and
make
it's-
sure that that's legal though.
Mhm.
So
Wait,
the
enforcement
proposed
plans.
language.
Oh, yeah,
would
exactly.
mirror the same language. So both, I think at that level, what's being proposed, I think from this group and also what our language covers that. We're calling it nuisance language. We're
Yep.
gonna bake in the special provisions of any zone where you had a direct illumination off property is immediately a violation case and could be resolved.
Yeah.
Upon the approval of this ordinance. The amortization period is a bigger question. Because when, at least from staff, I want to fair warn, we've done our research. There is no community that's actively pursued and been accomplished with 100% amortization period through IDA. Flagstaff, we contacted them, we contacted enforcement, and as you drive through Flagstaff, you're like, wait a minute, it's not compliant. The amortization, as far as the checklist goes, can be accomplished through what's being proposed in our ordinance. But what if we do that 3-year, we're gonna have to be aware that it's safe for all residential properties, all commercial properties that don't come into compliance, they're immediately in violation and then processed through violation and misdemeanor. So there's gonna be a lot of filing, and that has not, there is zero precedent in our region for that happening.
Yeah, and I think a part of that is that a lot of the dark skies initiatives taken by communities started in like 2018, 2019. And so if they have like a 5 to 10 year period, most of them haven't really matriculated yet to like the end of that amortization period. I think the big concern that was expressed was that if at the end of the amortization period, like any non-compliant like lighting fixture just goes into a legal non-conforming status, it's at that point, like we are kind of waiting for them to come to for a building permit or something to be able to make them compliant. So it's a very indefinite period. And to a certain degree, kind of similar to the conversation that we had regarding the landscape ordinance, like if I am renovating like my bathroom or like a carport, does that mean that I now need to like do this other thing where like if somebody's renovating like, or yeah, trying to sign up for a permit for sorry, it's actually not the same. But if somebody's trying to sign up to like build a carport, like is staff necessarily going to be made aware of like what type of lighting exists in the backyard?
Right. And that's how we have basically framed. So it's a big ask from staff, no matter how you shake it.
Yeah.
But that excuse me, is the approach we were taking this ordinance of, yep, if you're doing just like with landscaping, we're gonna have to get really deep into that property just off of a simple building permit.
But that would
that's
also, yeah, it would kind of require staff to still go out on site because like you can have like a building permit, but you don't necessarily know what the fixtures are on there.
Well, we have building plans, the building official
Yeah.
does go inspect, and we've currently been doing that. So that's actually an active process we've been doing. So if you're coming in for legal non-conforming, we are gonna have you update your lighting.
Just like a new.
It's for all lighting to be amended,
lighting
so
plan.
it's not
Yeah.
to the length of a carport, and then the lighting over here has to be adjusted just yet because of the language of our existing amortization, but that would be removed where it is correlated. And that because it's property initiated, far more defensible than I think us putting in that redevelopment aspect. Say there's a property owner, they're making rent. This improvement to their property costs them an electrician and improvements for those fixtures potentially based on what lighting it is they have. Couple $1,000 at minimum. At minimum, that's for maybe a couple fixtures inside might cost that much. So rewiring. So we're looking at a pretty onerous monetary weight that we're going to be putting on every property in the city, not just our commercial properties.
Yeah. And I
So
think,
it's something that needs to be,
Yeah.
I think, really evaluated. I get the ambitious goal that we're searching for, but I don't know if I don't want to be the one in that seat. I'll be perfectly honest with you.
no, and I think this would be kind of like in conjunction with like reconcerted education effort and that like having like Friends of Arches continue with like the reimbursement for changing fixtures and stuff like that. So finding ways, so part of like that amortization period would give the city time to identify ways to like help incentivize things along the way. And it's also kind of with the mindset of like once things do like roll over and they just become like illegal, like and not legal non-conforming, the city to a certain degree has like discretion into like its enforcement of that. And so like, yes, technically everything at that point that's not conforming to the code is at risk of having enforcement action taken on it. But it's kind of like choosing how we direct staff time. And so like having that once a month thing where you go out and find the most egregious things. And like,
I know that's the county's perspective for sure. I met with Kevin Walker a while back and that was definitely his perspective on that. But when a property's termed legal non-conforming, that sticks on the assessor evaluation of that. That affects a number of other elements lending wise with the property. So again, that's another, if we're wading into this territory, I want us to be aware of all the repercussions that this element might have. It's not as lightweight as just isolated incidents. So with that, and that's also performative. So I'm gonna say I'm not a fan of performative code, which is, well, this one's really bad. Well, what about the neighbor? It's not so bad. As far as planning and my staff, we've never operated that way and plan to try not to, but I get that we have limited ability. So we have to direct resources to the highest and most glowing fires, so to speak.
Yeah, and so I think it's like with, I guess number one is once it rolls over into legal non-conforming, how do you know which properties are legal non-conforming unless like you're actually going out and like verifying each like outdoor light fixture?
That is what we do everything, because most properties, and we said this in landscaping, most properties are legal non-conforming for a number of reasons, not just with landscaping, not just with lighting, and those are all processed through the building permit process. We evaluate them for compliance every time they come through the door.
Yeah, but if somebody doesn't come for a permit, like somebody doesn't want to do any renovation for 20 years,
and that's zoning. I would contest what we're practicing is not zoning. We're practicing a different practice. I don't know what you'd call it. But zoning is a slow, methodical approach to shifting and shaping communities, not immediate reconfigurations. So what I think we're doing with Darksite is not bad per se. I think it's an ambitious, good goal, but we're using the wrong tool, and I happen to be the tool being used to do that. So from a staff perspective, again, I think you're all clear on my position on this, but I won't make any more contests. I know you're just you're the messenger on this. I'm not trying to get too activated.
No, and I get it. I think like there is a bit of a concern that if we basically allow people, and we don't know what percentage of like our residents aren't like, or like don't have conforming fixtures or anything like that. If we have no pressure, no anything, then to a certain degree, this entire like lighting ordinance is a bit performative, where we're trying to meet these dark sky requirements, but then we're in practice actually not meeting dark sky requirements because we're allowing all of these non-compliant homes to potentially stay non-compliant for as long as they can hold out, like without needing some sort of major renovation that requires a building permit. And a part of this is tied in with like the attraction of coming to Moab is the dark skies. Like that is one of the attractive things. And so it's not just preserving kind of like locals' quality of life, but also being able to like offer up this like additional experience or like have it not go away. But yeah, I mean, I that's a part of one of the things that we talked about, and like the 3 years was thrown out. Like we potentially can extend that out further, like 5 years.
What's the minimum from the International Association?
The maximum is 10
the
years.
maximum.
And I guess to a certain degree, it's like, how do you count that 10 years? Is it from when we first started, or is it from when this goes live? Like, and but it's kind of like just, we can set the bar kind of high and then pull back or like finagle it, but if, I mean, I'm forgetting how this is phrased. But basically, yeah, so kind of we have this general approach to things that can then be adjusted like as time goes on, whereas if we just kind of have everything legal, everything becomes legal non-conforming as soon as this period ends, like that's really kind of hard to walk back. Whereas, because we do, I'm keep thinking like prosecutorial discretion, where like we do have some decision and we can see how onerous it is, like what we can see how successful our effort to educate and to try to incentivize and like really minimize any sort of cost burden that would be associated with coming into compliance for residents, and adjust things and potentially end up actually like going to, like if we see like, hey, we're not going to hit this and we don't have the capacity to this, like we still have the option of changing that to like, it'll switch over to legal non-conforming. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just generally getting kind of late,
Pure
so I
second.
want to
Yeah.
make sure that
Second.
we're.
I feel like this item also just feels like it requires a bit more thought. I mean, the idea of having a point at which everyone must come into compliance regardless of their like financial situation at the time or otherwise, and having them be essentially like having illegal lighting fixtures on their home, like there, to me, that's a big difference between going to a legal non-conforming system and having them come along to like hitting a point where a guy can drive down the street, pick your house out and come, you know, then you get a call and it's like, you have to spend this money to deal with this now. That feels like a fairly large ask.
And I guess kind of viewing it from like light pollution, like if you had somebody who is emitting like a ton of like unhealthy pollutants into the air, and like, but this type of like, we didn't have regulations like really controlling that, and we passed some, and so everything that is moving forward has to fall into compliance, but we still have these things that are polluting our environment, and they can continue to do that as long as they don't need to make a major renovation.
I would couple that within the ordinance proposed, there was a reason there was that 1-2 punch of nuisance lighting. So like you're saying, kind of pollutant lighting or nuisance lighting, that is covered. That would be immediately a violation. But if you happen to have the wrong temperature in a bulb that's otherwise fully compliant, that's a different scenario versus saying, no, that's immediately a violation at the same level that
Where you have a
spotlight
fixture
would
that's
be.
open on both ends, and it's not putting pollutant, like it's not light polluting directly or light trespass directly on your neighbor, but it is technically out of compliance with dark skies.
Sure.
And the things I really think about is, one, it's not the expense of the fixture that is going to be hard on people. It's going to be the expense of an electrician if you're not willing to do the work yourself, or simply the ability to find an electrician who will show up and help you within a reasonable amount of time. And if you were going to essentially police people in this way and insist that they get this fixture changed out, not because it was creating an immediate nuisance to the area around it, but because it simply was not in compliance with these new codes, that you would have to be very aware of that expense and just simply the availability of someone to do it in the first place. And that, as nice as it is to have the ability to get a fixture reimbursed or something like that, you know, you're going to spend a couple $100 on a lighting fixture and 3 times that on getting it installed. You know,
with that, and that's just our individuals in a residential property. I think we have to, from a liability perspective, think about, we're about to propose to a major commercial development, say a hotel, that is fully uncompliant, what the electrical improvement requirement and cost would be to that person. And it's not likely these properties are going to say, okay. So I think with that also needs to be understood. But if they're coming and say, we want to make this change, well, at the top of your change list, given that you're about to spend money, this is the top thing that has to change first. Was again, that approach of, if you're initiating it, here are the things that have to go first. But if not, that's again, are they going to hold out? Are they going to wait, that's a totally valid question for the community. It's again, that's how zoning typically works. But that's the value question of the community. Are we up for this battle? That's the question. If we're up for it, then I can get behind that and be it in the seat that I'll be in. But
And I guess also personally, like, if we were gonna go to a system that was not just the general legal non-conforming, come along with a building partner or permit system, I think there would have to be, like you said, like a very discretionary performative system where somebody drives down the street and goes, oh, that house, like that probably needs to be changed, but that house over there can probably fly for another year or two. I would rather see some kind of well-written system that says like, okay, if you are not in compliance and your lighting is now determined as illegal, like if you can show that you are taking steps, and this would have to be written out in such a way that you may not have the money to do the whole replacement remodel at the time, but if you can show that you are taking steps towards it, then that keeps you in a certain legal boundary. I mean, I honestly don't know. I just have very hard time stomaching like hitting a point where we're just requiring people to spend money on lighting that is not necessarily a nuisance. And so giving some amount of leeway where if they are working towards something, trying to find an electrician to do the work for them or otherwise, that would keep them from any.
which is kind of
any
not a joke.
further-
We have current violations that people have been going years saying, I can't get an electrician, I can't get an electrician. And at a certain point, I'm like, well, we're just going to start finding you again because clearly you're not trying hard enough, which is not, again, not a great place to put
That's
put
true.
us.
Sometimes it isn't, but that's why
Totally.
I think there would have to be something well defined if we were genuinely going to hit
Totally.
a point where we were like, you have to conform. There would have to be some kind of well-defined system so that if you're not just simply not ready to do it at that moment, that you can still make small changes that you may be able to fit into your budget, but not have to do a complete, I mean, unless you build a building permit or something, because at the point you're really ready to spend money, well, then that can be wrapped in. But
Yeah.
like, if you're not ready to spend money, there's got to be a way to show that you're willing to comply, but you just may not be able to at the time.
Is there any discussion of seeking external funding sources that would actually just cover the cost of residential and commercial
So at the
upgrades and not in a
initial-
reimbursement approach, but just upfront?
I think so far it's been the reimbursement approach with the Moab Dark Skies group. I know many people who've replaced, small fixtures on the outside of their house using the reimbursement for that, which is nice. It's like up to an X amount, you can get whatever you want. You just like submit your invoice for the fixture. But I don't know, as far as a fund, there could be something available for that. There's maybe grants out there to help retrofit Dark Sky. I don't know, but that's a good question, Carolyn.
It seems like a big burden to put on
Yeah.
individuals.
Yep.
Especially like older people in our
But
community aren't a very
Very
fixed
fixed
incomes.
but the reimbursement thing does work. It like matches the cost of something that's like very viable, and
Pretty
very
quickly
nice.
or like-
Pretty quickly, yeah.
But
Yeah.
they just reimburse the fixture, not the labor.
They would do the labor too, up to a certain amount.
Okay.
There were like two thresholds, I think, depending on income, and it was grant funded. So when their grant runs out, there aren't more reimbursements. And I don't think they would get the same thing from the same source again. So it's possible another source of, grant money could be found. Yeah, and then I think as far as going at like 3 years and then having people come out and like becoming non-compliant, we really would need significant resources towards trying to get people compliant if that's what we wanted to do. I mean, not just like we put a couple articles in the paper and talk to KZMU, but we would really need to go after it if that's what we were
You
thinking.
literally have to police it.
Yeah, and I think there was some other discussion about, and once again, the 3 years are just kind of thrown out, like we potentially have 5, if not 10 years to like stretch out this like amortization period. But there's also discussion of like having like a prioritization discussion like internally that then gets incorporated into the public education thing, where like we kind of lay out the plan where like once everything becomes like illegal or non-conforming, like this is the route, like the enforcement route that like the city is going to take, where kind of like small homes and stuff, which probably are going to have like the lowest number of like non-compliant fixtures, like are kind of put towards the end of it. And it's one of those things, if we do a really good job of educating the community about it and kind of making them aware, like, hey, like 5 years down the line, like there's potentially going to be this like financial hit. Like we're giving people time to save money and prepare for that.
I mean, that's what we're already
I
in the
think we
period
did that.
of.
I think that's the
Yeah.
point, is we
Yeah.
got there and you said it didn't work. And I want to, because Joe was there.
Yeah.
I can't, the effort was there. It wasn't
No,
like we missed the boat.
What was brought up at the meeting today is, in the midst of all of that, is we had a pandemic happen, and like a lot of that kind
That
of
is a
like
very good point.
puttered off.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of success seen early on. And I think if it's a combined effort with like the county and the city to really get after it, like we're saying, and that's where, if we see like a year or 2 or 3 into it that it's not working, like we still have time to make amendments.
Do we have different amortization periods for zones?
We could, do we now, you mean?
Could we?
Oh, for within this ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could say within the zone, it would have to be amortized. Totally, 100%. Where it's, the threshold for the IDA is that you have a period
Yeah.
of which you have a compliance plan.
Yeah.
So what's proposed without an immediate termination is still a compliant amortization plan. It just doesn't have immediate termination, which is the kind of the intended idea, I think, that was originally put forward, is that
Mhm.
at some point we're 100% compliant.
Yeah.
I think I'd be open to evaluating certain zones for sure. That would kind of eliminate this discretionary aspect and maybe make it a little bit more
Mhm.
intentional, but staggered.
And I like that. I like that.
Um,
If it's like, if we're anticipating there, you could see one amorti, like, I'm just thinking residential, commercial. Like you could see the benefit and the need to address one first or the other first, depending. It's like, do you want to do residential first because it's smaller scale, it's smaller things, and it actually does impact people in their homes, likely a little bit more than commercial? Or do you want to do commercial if we're really looking at like sky?
Mhm.
Or we have so much zone intermixing that probably.
And I think it's the addition of this, of bundling these things, of having maybe what the provisions are outlined as far as legal nonconformance immediately, but then keeping that immediate termination clause. So it's not either or, but saying, okay, we're gonna have immediate nuisance, we're gonna have immediate legal nonconforming, and then we have a 10-year amortization. Mostly because I think, okay, if we want to put it 10 years from now, which would be viable under the current checklist, we could put it from this date, 10 years from this ordinance, if we wished. The world will look very different in 10 years, where 5 years was pretty ambitious. 10 years, still pretty ambitious, but like you say, it gives us plenty of time to work through this legal nonconforming process, see what comes out the other side, and say, actually, we've taken a good chunk. We feel the rest of it, yeah, let's go ahead and move them immediate deleted violation, or man, this didn't work at all. Even legal nonconforming didn't work. What do we want to do now? So that might be a staff compromise of utilizing all three versus either or.
And I think any way to incentivize it rather than punish it, like that is what's going to get us our greatest gains anyways, because someone will fight you tooth and nail if you force them to change things on their own property. Like I get that. But if you can encourage them to see the value in it, like you said, not only for having a nice, quiet neighborhood that feels quiet at night, but also for the tourist attraction that it makes us, for for all of the different benefits that having the dark sky can be. If we can incentivize it, lessen the financial impact on people, and really try to build that change from the carrot perspective rather than the stick perspective, I think that's a lot easier for everyone to stomach. And knowing that 10 years down the line the stick is coming, but having plenty of time to take advantage of these programs, like you said, educate people that these programs even exist, and that they can get their lighting fixtures reimbursed or something like that could be huge.
So it seems like potentially the temperature generally is like, let's try it again, push it out, try it again.
Yeah.
The original.
And I think
intent.
like the existence of the stick can maybe make the cookie seem a little sweeter.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
and yeah, and like throughout this like period, we can have like a little bit of a proactive like staff where like once a year, like they kind of drive through neighborhoods and just like, hey, we noticed that like you have not like in 10 years or in 5 years or whatever, like your lights will be non-compliant, and then we provide all the information of like the different programs that are available. So like not only are we trying to do community education and everything, but like along the way, we're actually doing check-ins with people.
You should just like they do with noxious weeds, you
Mhm.
know, leave a note in your mailbox that says, hey, we noticed you have X, Y, and Z on your property. If you would like help removing it, there are these resources, and, you know, just be aware of this situation. In the same way, I think we could work with people and not have to make them like genuinely illegal properties or illegal lighting.
We need a volunteer nosy citizens committee.
Oh, they exist.
Oh, I know they
They're-
do. I know, like literally, are you a retired person in Moab with time?
Are you sad you're
Would
not
you
part of
like
an
to,
HOA?
would you like to walk around your neighborhood and nitpick things you don't like that also don't conform with the code? Apply to join today.
I think we'll be careful to advise anything like that.
Like a lot of
Reserve
that should
that.
come from a staff level,
Yeah.
not a citizenry level.
Yeah, time to spare.
I think a lot of this comes back to the purpose of this dark skies.
Mhm.
I'm from a dark skies town
Yeah, yeah.
because we had a telescope on top of the mountain for
Mhm.
research purposes. That's why Flagstaff's a dark skies
Yeah, yeah.
town.
Mm.
It's not because everybody wants to live in the dark in the pine trees. It's for educational
Mhm.
purposes.
Mm.
And we don't have that here. So we just, right?
We do in different ways. We have,
We have an educational telescope that
not a
requires
telescope, but we
dark
have
sky.
a lot of
Yeah.
research going on as far as like
Mhm.
migration
To see the-
patterns of species in the park.
So those are
you know.
things that can be included in that purpose, right? This is why we're
air
encouraging everybody
quality.
to do it for this, not just because we want to make it nice for the tourists. I don't
Oh,
know
for
that
sure.
a lot of people are
For
gonna
sure.
get on board for that, but if we can name the things
Yep.
in that purpose,
Yeah.
then maybe more people would be on board voluntarily.
I love
and it
walking
would
out my
be-
front door and being able to see the stars. That is a huge benefit to
Yeah.
living in this town.
From
But
somebody
when
who likes-
you get home tonight, you're gonna want to be able to see, to be able to put your key in the lock and get in your house and walk from your car to
I don't
your
lock my
porch
house.
with that. I don't want to on the way to mine. I'm too old. I
No,
won't
I know,
recover,
no, for
but
sure.
No, and
Yeah.
I definitely have that bias. Like I moved here from like Chicago. Like if I saw like 3 stars in the sky, like that was a good night. Right?
They're
Whereas,
probably planets.
yeah,
Yeah.
celestial bodies.
There you go.
But and so yeah, to like literally be able to step out my front door and see the Milky Way with like my naked eye, it's
Special.
it is.
Mhm.
And like
Yeah.
it's a part of what makes Moab special to me. And like that's my personal beliefs and values. And like I don't necessarily want to impose those on the community, but it also seems like the community has in some part decided this is something that we do value.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why there was kind of the palette to have that enforcement. You know, like these are things that we value, and like we should kind of take actions that like support and promote the things that we value.
Well, I think you just sort of summed it up a little bit. I think sort of the big picture is like, we're figuring out ways to make it even better. What everyone agrees on is like, you can see your front door right now when you go to have it with our existing porch lights and everything. You can also still see the Milky Way. And so we want to at least have it where it is now, not to get worse.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We're figuring out ways to make it better without imposing too much on citizens, but we have put in place something that I think really is a really good framework for it not getting worse. We're not going to have brand new big commercial buildings popping up that has tons of lighting that's going to contribute to the problem. Those are the ones that are going to be the more sort of forward facing. It's just kind of figuring out, the rest. Because right now we do have safe lighting, but we can see the stars, so it's like. Right
Well,
there.
and before that enforcement period kicks into whenever it ends up being decided that it happens, I think it would be really important to have a concerted effort to explore additional grant funding opportunities and do a cost analysis of what the actual cost on individuals would be from the types of common upgrades that would need to take place. Because even if people are kind of values aligned about appreciating dark skies, I think you can put a price tag on that, you know, for a lot of families that are struggling with bills, and that you wouldn't necessarily prioritize that because of your preference for dark skies over other bills that you're facing.
Yeah, and I now speaking on like my own behalf, like I think, like I said, if this is something that we as a community and subsequently we as like community leaders have identified as this is something meaningful and valuable to us, then we need to put it like our money where our mouth is. And like outside of grants, like there are things that the city and the county can do collaboratively to like start pulling a fund together that can help like make this more feasible.
I think, and I'll, again, like just trying to be mindful of time, we should wrap up, but interestingly, I feel like a couple of the times where I've seen new non-conforming fixtures or things that maybe are a little egregious because something broke and they had to go buy something really quickly at the hardware store. And so it seems like potentially something interesting and good that we could do would be
Just have a stock of free replacements.
maybe, or just work with our local retailers to make sure that nobody is selling a fixture that potentially would put someone in violation. Cause that's overnight rentals too. Like you think the property maintenance company is gonna like, you know, order something from Home Depot if they need to replace something quick before another guest is coming in. No, they're going, which is great. They're going to Walker, they're going to Turner, they're going to Standard, you know, to grab something to just put it in. And oftentimes it's those like old, you know, like the bulb sticks up and there's the glass all around it and things. Like I've actually seen a couple of those go in places that didn't have them before around town. I'm like, I bet that's what happened. Cause I've gone looking for a new fixture and it's like, oh, that's the cheapest one, sweet. So, I mean, maybe that's like a fun, not a fun thing, but you know, we're not saying you have to, but we're just saying like, maybe it's Alexi, you know, meeting with whoever the buying manager is at those businesses and saying like, here's some cool options that are the same price point of the ones you guys have now in the store. Could be an interesting inventory project for Vista or something.
That would be a good new relation to build because again, within this last 5-year period, we did that attempt. And it wasn't successful.
Really? I didn't realize that.
Again, I think there's some commentary in the community that I think the majority of the community does value this. They do want to see it. Some people are not in favor of this, and obstinately so.
How cool would it be to make it easy to be like, you don't have to do your own research, just go to a local store and anything you can buy there is
hopefully
gonna be
new
compliant.
relationships could versus what was done, you know, a couple of years ago is maybe build some where it is successful. That'd be a new.
They don't stop selling the ones that aren't.
Yeah.
Can you put a sticker?
Yeah, stickers. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I just making it easy for people that's I think the very first step in everything.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, in respect of everybody's time, like thank you so much for like this conversation, just really all the conversations tonight. I felt they were really, really productive. And
A lot
yeah,
of
this
stuff
is
to tell everybody else.
yes. But no, I mean this is a really complicated like thing. Like math got brought in today, and I don't think anybody came in today expecting
hated
to
it.
have like
Geometry.
yeah.
Ew.
That was my favorite kind of
lesson.
math. Yeah,
Bless your heart.
it's visual at least.
Yeah, and thank you to the staff. Like I know this has been, like you said, basically a year.
Yes.
Like in the process of this update.
Yeah, and I know we're gonna be moving a lot of this really quick. That's why I think we indulged in like I know it's really late, really appreciate, but this has been really helpful both from I think the group that Luke has been participating with, but also the commentary here because we're gonna be turning around the product pretty quick. So I want to encapsulate maybe even 2 options, one representing all these and maybe some multiple recommendations. So.
And there was like a lot more discussed, but I think we hit all of the things that were identified as the big things that really need to be.
Great. Thanks for relaying all of that to us too. Corey, future agenda items.
This no, we do have I'm not quite prepared for that, but we have a number of plans. So sustainability plan, Parks Master Plan. And
yeah.
we've moved past the affordable housing plan. Congratulations on your recommendation tonight. And then we have a number of ordinances. So landscaping is coming back before you now in public hearing. Dark skies gonna be coming back before you public hearing.
Yeah.
And I think we have one more action item for you before the end of the year. So those are all kind of initiative built and plan built items as opposed to site plans and like our typical bread and butter. So we do have some condominium plats coming forward and some site plans that are in the works. Nothing's immediately ready for our next meeting. So I'll go ahead and let you know next time we meet when those are going to be about ready.
Cool. Thanks, Corey. My future agenda item is that, as everyone likely knows, we have a city election this year. And I would really encourage everyone to make sure you are registered to vote, to participate in that process. There are 5 excellent candidates who will take 3 seats on city council along with Luke and Jason. And just everyone participate. Ballots go out in the mail and they're due back on November 20th. So
Awesome.
very late election this year. It's very weird, but hopefully it gives people time. All right. Anybody else? All right. Thanks. Adjourning at 9:20 p.m.
Good one, guys. Yeah, you didn't get those last meetings off for free.